Welcome to the Daily Faceoff Show, your everyday source for the latest news with top-notch insight and analysis. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in. It is March 21st, 2022, and this is the Daily Faceoff Trade Deadline Special. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, and I'll be here with you for the next 3.5 hours as we break down not only what's happened so far today on Deadline Day, but everything that is to come. As you can see, we will have a timer up in the top left corner of your screen, keeping an eye on how long until Deadline Day exactly. We'll be joined by our big panel of experts and analysts, as well as you can see former Vancouver Canucks AGM Chris Gear, Blackburn of Bally Sports, Chris Peters, our prospect insider, and Matt Larkin, the managing editor of Daily Faceoff. He'll be keeping tabs on our Manscaped trade targets list throughout the day. And of course, the big man, the insider, Frank Saravalli, will be here. And not only is he joining us whenever he's got breaking news, but Frank Saravalli is going to be on the screen all show up in the top corner with our insider creeper cam. Let's bring in Frank Saravalli now. Frank, let's just start with this. What have you thought of the pace of Deadline Day so far?
Yeah, it's sort of been just as busy as the weekend was. It's been a steady flow, I guess you could say, and it's been interesting to watch everything unfold. I know a lot of people entered into Deadline today thinking, oh, this is going to be quiet, not a lot happening. All the big names are off the board. We saw the ginormous Marc-Andre Fleury trade. There's still lots to come, and I think what's so interesting about this Deadline Day is not necessarily the rental guys that are out there, but some of the other big name players that have term that teams have been engaged in talks with for a long time, that I think teams have watched this market evolve over the last week to 10 days. And they say, some of these prices are pretty high for rental players. What can we do to maybe trade for a player that has some term? How much more will it cost us? So that's certainly something that teams have been considering, and it's just cruising right along as we're now less than 3 hours away.
The biggest splash we've gotten so far today is Marc-Andre Fleury going to the Minnesota Wild. It's a conditional second-round pick going back to the Chicago Blackhawks. Frank, you were all over this one. What do you think of the fit of Fleury to the Wild?
I think it's pretty seamless. You know, when Marc-Andre Fleury was considering his options, he wanted to go to a place that really had an opportunity to win. And that's what the Minnesota Wild think that they have with Fleury and net. And if you think about their season, they've been as good as just about anyone in the Western Conference except the Colorado Avalanche. And so if there's a team out there that has an opportunity to take down the Avs, the Minnesota Wild are in that conversation with the Calgary Flames, with the St. Louis Blues, and some others. And so they bolster their netminder position and trade Capo Kakkonen in short order as well to San Jose. They beef up their blue line and getting a minute chewer and Jacob Middleton in that separate transaction for Kakkonen. And so for Fleury, the interesting part about how it evolved was really the tug of war between Minnesota and Chicago. Chicago desperately wanted to get a first-round pick, and I think they realized at some point this morning, their GM Kyle Davidson, and that no other team was in the market for Marc-Andre Fleury. So they had a choice to make. Are we willing to take a conditional second-round pick? And the conditions on it are that the Minnesota Wild must advance to the Western Conference Final, and Marc-Andre Fleury must have 4 or more wins in the first 2 rounds in order for that second-round pick to become a first. These two teams haggled back and forth on the conditions, on the price for a long time, both gritting their teeth. I think that's probably the best sign of a good trade, is where you end up with both sides a little bit unhappy in terms of the price paid, but certainly the Minnesota Wild are thrilled to get their netminder that's going to give them a top flight chance to win a Stanley Cup.
I like that kind of motto. If nobody's happy, then everybody wins, right? Frank, just quickly here before we let you go, because we know you're busy with a ton of insider stuff. What team are you maybe keeping an eye on that's maybe been a little bit quiet so far?
Well, there's a few. One is the Colorado Avalanche. They really haven't done much since getting Josh Manson. Another is the St. Louis Blues. You saw the Minnesota Wild step up and get Marc-Andre Fleury. I think the Blues have been involved in a number of different conversations for forwards, for defensemen. They've been involved with Jacob Chychrun, some rental defensemen as well. So I'd keep an eye on the Blues over the next 3 hours. And then some of the other wild card teams that we've been talking about for a while, teams that could make a splash by trading players with term on their deals or are under team control. I'm thinking of the New Jersey Devils, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think it's going to be a somewhat quiet day for the Philadelphia Flyers, aside from trading Justin Braun at some point before 3 p.m. But buckle up, because there's a lot of names in play still.
Buckle up, and like I said, Frank will be on screen the entire day up with our insider cam in the top right-hand corner. So Frank, I'm sure we will be chatting with you soon. But let's move along here and bring in Matt Larkin, who's keeping an eye on things with our trade targets list. It's presented by Manscaped, and yes, we do have a promo code for you. DFO Deadline gets you 20% off and free shipping, courtesy of our friends over at Manscaped. And Mr. Larkin, excited to have you on the show here. Going to be keeping track of this trade targets list. But number one is off the board. Marc-Andre Fleury, like we said, to the Minnesota Wild. What do you think of that move for the Wild?
I like it for the Wild. Maybe not as much as everyone does, but I think if you look at the bracket, especially over on the Pacific Division side, you kind of stop and think, okay, well, the Calgary Flames are the bully over there. Colorado's the bully in the Central. Maybe there is a chance to make a run here if you're the Minnesota Wild. I do think they're one of the deepest teams, if not the deepest team in the conference, top to bottom, forward core and D core. We know what Marc-Andre Fleury brings. I always say he has 1.5 Stanley Cup rings, right? He won 1.5 as a starter. He won another one on the bench, brings invaluable experience, is arguably the most beloved player of his generation by other players. There's no doubt he's going to fit seamlessly into that room. For his family, of course, geographically, it's a nice, easy move from Chicago to Minnesota. From the Blackhawks perspective, I like the deal as well. I think the odds of bringing back Marc-Andre Fleury were starting to dwindle. If he wants to win, we know that Hawks room was not happy with the Brandon Hagel trade. Jonathan Toews did not mince words. He spoke publicly about it. So I did not picture Marc-Andre Fleury wanting to be around next year. If Chicago knows they're going to lose him for nothing, you have to get something for him. So the conditional second rounder makes sense.
Yeah, and I like the move by Mini as well, flipping Capo Kakinen for something they can actually use, not just a pick as well. Looking at the rest of our trade targets here, Andrew Kopp is number 2 on our list. It then goes Nick Leddy, Ricard Raquel, Max Domi, Tyler Mott, Justin Braun, Tyler Bertuzzi, Sean Monahan, and Jacob Chikrin. Matt, which one of those names in the top 10 sort of intrigues you the most for the rest of the day?
If we're talking pure intrigue for just a humdinger of a trade, of course it's going to be Jacob Chikrin. To me, the question is, does it make sense for Arizona to make that trade today? I think you limit your number of suitors if you're making the deal on deadline day when things are moving quickly and you're usually dealing with contending teams. And we know how young Chikrin is. He's in his early 20s. He's got term left with a great AAV. If you hold him to the summer, if you really want to make a trade, if you're Bill Armstrong, you will have 31 suitors for Jacob Chikrin, because to me, that's someone that even a rebuilding team would want. And that, of course, brings in a bigger question. Does it even make sense at all to trade Jacob Chikrin? To me, that is a foundational piece. He led all defensemen in goals last year with 18. I don't understand why you want to trade him unless the return is absolutely astronomical. And if you think of that type of return, to me, that's more of a draft day trade, something you want to nurture over time to get that big package. It's hard to pull off in one day when teams are scrambling. I think it's risky to move him today. If we're looking at sort of more realistic names, I think Kopp as well, Tyler Mott as well. You can play a drinking game. If anyone mentions Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman on deadline day, you take a drink. It's going to happen often. Everyone is looking for those sort of middle six versatile forwards that can put you over the top. I think Kopp in particular embodies that.
Yeah, I think maybe we could play a little game with all of our analysts here. The first one to call Brandon Hagel the 2022 Blake Coleman has to buy around for everyone. Matt, we'll be checking in with you periodically throughout the day. It's our trade targets list presented by Manscaped. Let's keep humming along, though, and bring in Pete Blackburn of Bally Sports. Excited to have Pete along with us for our deadline day coverage. I also like how many different areas of the continent we're really covering here. I'm up in the Nation Network offices in Edmonton. We got Matt in Toronto, Frank's in Philly, Pete out in Boston. And Pete, let's start with your neck of the woods here and the move that the Boston Bruins made a couple of days ago, not only acquiring Hampus Lindholm, but signing him to that big extension as well. What did you think of the piece of work from Don Sweeney?
I thought it was great. I mean, they needed the defensive reinforcements. I personally was rooting for Jacob Chikrin, but I thought that was a long shot. Obviously you look at Chikrin and his age and how affordable he is, and just his skill set. I agree with Matt. Why would you trade that guy? Even if you are a rebuilding team, he should fit into your plans. But if you get a giant package for him, why not? Going beyond that, I think Hampus Lindholm is a really good pickup for the Bruins, both now and fits into their future plans. The only thing that really concerns me there is the 8-year extension. It's obviously a pretty hefty extension, and you're carrying him through his age 36 season. We've seen a little bit of a drop off in terms of impact for Hampus Lindholm over the past few years. You kind of think that the Bruins are banking on that being a product of him playing in Anaheim. But, if it ends up not being the case, you're stuck with him through age 36. So that could be an issue. But right now, the Bruins have a window that they're trying to capitalize on. So I think this is a move that makes them a lot better.
Pete Blackburn of Bally Sports joining us. Pete, the interesting part about that division too, like we've seen Florida now kind of load up. Tampa Bay's made a couple of big moves. Toronto got Mark Giordano. Boston makes their big swing as well. The fascinating thing is it's very likely two of those teams don't even make it out of the first round. Are you maybe surprised that we've seen all these teams sort of start to take swings when they're all on a collision course to go head to head so early in the playoffs?
Not really, because when you look at where each of those teams is, the only one that really isn't facing much pressure is Tampa, because Tampa's won back-to-back Stanley Cups. But you obviously look at Florida, they haven't won a playoff series since 96. Toronto, we don't even have to go into that. We know that the pressure that they're facing. And then the Bruins, the Bruins are in a situation where their window is closing as well, with, Patrice Bergeron's status being uncertain beyond this season. So, obviously you look at what those teams are going to have to go through in terms of a playoff run. It's going to be tough no matter what, but it's not really surprising that they're trying to make a run for it right now.
Moving outside of this division, who are you kind of keeping an eye on as a team that you think could maybe make a big splash, or maybe a team that you think should be more active than maybe they have been so far?
I would have said Minnesota, but they've gotten some good work done early here. I think Minnesota, we've seen like the wheels fall off a little bit in recent years, and recent months. So, you want to see them get more saves. They get Marc-Andre Fleury, the best goaltender available on the market. I really like that move for them. And especially, you look at the dead cap coming from Minnesota. So this was a year to be aggressive. I would have said them, but again, Bill Guerin doing a lot of his work early. So good for him.
Pete, we'll be checking in with you throughout the day as our instant analyst for all the deals that come down. We'll keep it. We'll keep in touch here. We'll be talking to you hopefully pretty soon. I see Frank Saravalli working that phone up in the top right-hand corner there. Whenever a deal gets made, obviously Frank's going to be on to break it. Pete will give us his instant reaction, and then we're also going to be having former Vancouver Canucks AGM Chris Gear join us as well. Let's get to Chris Gear now, I think, unless I don't think we have anything from Frank quite yet. But yes, let's get to Gear's grades. It's brought to you by 3Ice, the new professional 3-on-3 hockey league. Head to 3ice.com and hit that tickets tab for more info. And Chris Gear, this is your first deadline on the media side of things, usually, obviously, in a front office, in a war room as well. All right, we might not have Chris Gear quite yet. Hey, we do have Chris Gear. Let's bring in Chris Gear to the show. Chris, the start of the day from a media perspective compared to the start of the day in a war room, did you get a chance to maybe catch some extra sleep today?
Yeah, I did sleep in just a little bit longer. I was still up early, but when you work for a team on the West Coast, you're in the office at 4:30 or 5 a.m., and the teams on the East Coast have already been busy, so you're trying to play catch up a little bit. Working for a team, you're laser focused on your own team and the deals that you're trying to make. And here on the media side, I've been focused on all 32 teams. So a bit of a different mindset for me, but it's been a fun first foray on the media side for deadline day.
Let's get to some Gears grades here presented by 3Ice, and let's do the big deal. Everyone wants us to talk about it. The Marc-Andre Fleury trade. How are you handing out your grades for this one, Chris?
Well, let's start with the Minnesota Wild, and everybody knows that next year they've got $12.6 million of dead space thanks to their buyouts of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So you got to forecast that in the next few years, the Wild are going to struggle to, build out a roster with that dead space. So this was the year for them to go for it. They've had a strong year. They're one of the contenders in the Western Conference for sure. And, why not go and get the best goalie available on the market? And they were able to do that without having to give up a first-round pick. And they got Chicago to retain half of Fleury's salary, even though for this year they could have accommodated that full cap hit. So I think, really good deal by the Wild. Fleury's the kind of guy that if he gets on a hot streak, he can win a round on his own. He's that good. He was the Vezina Trophy winner last year. He's shown flashes of that again this year with Chicago. So I think Fleury is the kind of guy that, and Talbot and Kakkonen have played pretty well for the Wild this year, but to bring in a guy with the pedigree and the ability of Fleury, I just think that's a really solid deal for the Wild. So I'm going to give the Wild a B+ on this one. And from Chicago's perspective, I know that Kyle Davidson was limited in where he could move Fleury. It sounds like from Frank's reporting that really that might have been the only opportunity for him. So if that's the case, still good to get a second round or it's a conditional second that won't have to be a first unless the Wild go to the conference finals and Fleury wins 4 or more games. So I think, from Chicago's perspective, that's not too bad. You would have liked to get a little bit more, just given the returns that some people have paid for, the top D-men and the top forwards on the market. You look at the haul for Giroux or for Hampus Lindholm. So you would have thought that the top goalie on the board might have garnered a little bit more, but still, given the constraints that the Blackhawks had, I think garnering a second that could turn into a first is still pretty decent. So I'm going to go with a B on that one. So a slight edge to the Minnesota Wild, but all in all, I think a good deal for both sides.
Chris, whenever there is a big deal that goes down, we'll have you back on to give us your grade on that. That's Chris Gear, former Vancouver Canucks AGM and legal analyst. From one Chris to another, let's chat with our friend Chris Peters here. And there haven't been any prospects moved really so far today, but we did get a couple a little bit earlier in the week. So let's start with those with Chris Peters and the next wave. Chris, Owen Tippett going back to Philly as a part of that Claude Giroux deal. What do you think about the move there, and what do you think about the fit of Tippett in Philly?
Well, I think Owen Tippett has probably needed a fresh start for a while. He's been through multiple coaching staffs and in Florida, and no one's really ever found out exactly how to use him. Now, this is a guy that was an elite player in junior hockey, a good scorer, a guy that has, a lot of tools that you would expect from an offensive player. So I really like Owen Tippett overall as a player. Now, we talk about leverage and different things like that. Could the Flyers have done better in the deal? I think getting an NHL-ready player in Owen Tippett was a good get for them. He's a guy that I think could play up their lineup a little bit more than he could in Florida. There's going to have to be some more development there, though. I think coaches have wanted to see him take another step, get kind of out of his own way a little bit, and just provide that all-around effort that he's going to need to be an NHL player. You can't just be one-dimensional. You can't just be an offensive guy. I just like the player. I've watched him long enough to think that there's more upside to be mined out of that. And, technically he's not going to be a rookie or he's not your traditional prospect, but he's a guy that, currently was playing in the AHL at the time of the contract. So he's another one of those guys where you just want to see a little bit more from him over time. And it's going to be up to Philly to get that out of him to maximize the value of that deal. But I think the upside is there. I think the numbers will be a little bit better. And as long as you put him in the right situation, he's a guy that can produce.
We're going to get to our main panel here with Mike McKenna and Scott Burnside in just a couple of minutes. But Chris, are there a couple of teams that you're maybe keeping an eye on out there who you look at and go, they're maybe in that window, they have a deep prospect pool, maybe they dip into it here in the next 2 hours and 38 minutes?
Yeah, I think the two teams that have the most pieces in terms of prospects deal are Los Angeles and New York. And I think that that's really two teams where if they're going to make deals, they have the surplus of prospects to do that. I think in LA's case in particular, all of the players in their prospect system, there's not going to be enough room for them everywhere. You aren't going to have enough roster spots to go around. So what does that mean for guys in their system, guys they like? Tyler Madden, who's had a really good season in the AHL, who's already been traded in his young career but has value. Guys like Rasmus Kupari, who have been up and down the lineup in the NHL. Is there a spot for him? Do you make a bold decision and maybe deal Alex Turcotte, a former number 5 overall pick? Those are the types of decisions that Los Angeles is going to have to make. I don't think they're going to be too boldly aggressive because they've really had a vision and have stuck to it in terms of their rebuild. And I think that that's something that they'll continue to do. One team on the other side of the equation, though, and they've done some of that work already in the last couple of days, is Arizona. which is going to be trying to acquire prospects. We saw Kyle Connor's draft rights, or sorry, not Kyle Connor, Nathan Smith's draft rights move. That would have been, big trade. Nathan Smith's draft rights moved from Winnipeg to Arizona. They've also acquired Jack McBain's draft rights from Minnesota. So those are two big college centers, guys that are two-way players that can kind of play for them as soon as they're needed. Both are eligible to become free agents, however, have the opportunity to not sign. It sounds like McBain is pretty well set in Arizona. Smith might take a little bit more work because he can go UFA, but he's a Hobey Baker finalist this year and has really developed extremely well. So keep an eye on Arizona as they continue to try and acquire more prospects as well. We'll have to see, what does that mean? Does it make Phil Kessel out there? What's going to happen with the Chychrun trade? There would have to be major prospects involved in that for that to happen. So that's the other team on the other side of the equation in the prospect collection aspect that I'll be watching as well.
Chris, fantastic stuff. And yeah, that great insight on the McBain acquisition from Arizona as well. One that went down just after 11 p.m. Eastern last night. We'll be coming to you whenever a prospect is involved with the deal, so make sure you're close to that laptop all day. Let's get to our main panel now. And these are two guys you're going to be seeing a lot of throughout our show. And if you follow the Daily Faceoff show, you already know who they are. It's Mike McKenna, former NHLer, and Scott Burnside. And we mentioned the different areas of the continent we're kind of checking off. Mike McKenna coming to us from St. Louis. Scott Burnside out in PNC Arena in Raleigh, North Carolina as well. Scott, I'm going to start with you with this question. We got a couple of interviews that you've done over the last week coming up on the show. You talked to Jay Feaster, who's been the general manager over during a trade deadline. You talked to Colby Armstrong, a player who's been dealt at the deadline. And you talked to Brandon Walker, a team services. He works in team services for the Nashville Predators. It's really interesting how, from an outside perspective, we just sit here, we watch our trade tracker, we see the moves that come in, and we talk about their impact on the ice. But it really is neat how there's so many different facets of an organization that are kind of worked into what deadline day is.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyler, first of all, I'd just like to say, I feel like Mike and I are kind of like the big name acts at those summer music festivals where you have all those little acts and they come on and they fill up the time and then all of a sudden people are waiting for the big name act. Now, I'm not complaining, but 25 minutes into the show and Mike and I got tons to talk about. And here we are. We're just getting our chance. But no, it's your question about the conversations. We talk about machinery within the game and the machinery of trades and all those kinds of things. And Mike knows this as well. There are so many layers to it. And, I enjoyed my conversation with Jay Feaster, who was, of course, GM of the Tampa Bay Lightning when they won the Stanley Cup in 2004, the first of three. And we also talked about having to trade critical pieces from that cup winning team a few years down the road. So both sides of that coin, the emotion involved in bringing in a player that or hope will help fit within your team and in pushing the team forward toward the ultimate goal. But it happens when you have to trade that player away, and the emotion is strong. And Colby Armstrong was terrific. Once upon a time, Sidney Crosby's road roommate ended up going in a deal for a future Hall of Famer in Marian Hossa. Found out about the deal while he was having a pregame nap on Long Island. His mom called him to tell him about the deal. So great stuff there. And Brandon Walker has been terrific over the years. Always loved my time with Brandon. In fact, I got to hang out with Brandon Walker a couple years ago when the Predators acquired Brian Boyle from the New Jersey Devils. And just that part of it, how do you get a player into your town and into your team and picking up gear and all the kinds of things that go in to getting a player settled in his new location. A lot of people don't think of the difficulties that may arise there. So, yep, ton of fun, Tyler, and looking forward to lots more FaceTime with Mike as the afternoon rolls on.
Scott, I would love to say I heard that answer, but we're having a little bit of technical problems. I know the listener heard you, but I did not. So anyways, we'll keep moving on. I see your lips have stopped moving. So we're just going to go on to Mike McKenna. Mike, you bring
I sure heard Scott.
As a player, what are some memories you have from your career about deadline day?
Well, thankfully, I was only moved once at the trade deadline, and it was kind of a weird deal. I made it through lunchtime, which was, I don't know if it was noon, trade deadline, Eastern, whatever it was that year. And maybe it was 2 o'clock. I was getting ready to play a game with the Springfield Thunderbirds. We were the affiliate of the Florida Panthers. And trade deadline comes and goes, and I'm like, all right, I got to go get my tracksuit, put the trash bag on and get ready to go down the road and play against Hartford. And I get a call, and I look at my phone, and it says Eric Joyce, who was the assistant general manager of the Florida Panthers. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. And sure enough, I'd been traded. It just hadn't come across. And it was after the deadline. It was like way late. And just thought, oh, dude, I didn't expect this at all. Like, my numbers aren't even like good this year. What's happening, man? Like, they've told me all along, all season, they were trying to trade Red O'Bara and that's a whole nother story. And then I was the guy that got traded, but it ended up turning out to be an incredible experience for me because I went to Syracuse Crunch, which was a Tampa Bay affiliate. I ended up going to the Calder Cup Finals in the American Hockey League, which set me up for another season afterwards with the Dallas Stars organization. It was a good deal, but it was crazy, man. Like every year I felt this nervousness, even though I was never a blue chip prospect. I was in the minors almost every time, but you have nervousness. You just never know who's included in a trade. And especially like the one that I experienced was out of nowhere, like 1-for-1 deal, me for Adam Wilcox. Okay. Like that was the deal. And I was supposed to lead the Crunch to the promised land. And I'm like, dude, all right, let's do this. But I didn't expect it at all. So it always had people on pins and needles. My wife, especially, like it just, man, she was always freaking out, thinking we're headed somewhere. We're gonna have to pack everything. What about the kids? And especially as you get older and later in life, and in your career, you really think about those things. It's not just yourself. It's not just a matter of putting everything in the back of your car and going down the road. There's a lot more to it. So, and especially at the NHL level, you see that, especially players in the NHL level, they have houses, they're ingrained in communities, they do all kinds of stuff that when you get dealt, man, you got to tie up those loose ends. And that's almost what you're more nervous about than you are actually performing on the ice. It's the off ice things that you have to take care of as a human being to make things comfortable.
We're going to get to our countdown segment in just a second here. Matt Larkin counting down the 5 best and 5 worst deadline deals of all time. Just quickly, though, we've kind of gotten everyone else's take on it here. So in kind of 30 seconds or less, Scott Burnside, what do you think of Marc-Andre Fleury to the Minnesota Wild?
I love the deal, and I don't think you can understate the relationship between GM Bill Guerin in Minnesota and Marc-Andre Fleury, of course, teammates in Pittsburgh, and had a long connection there, even as Bill started his executive career with the Penguins. So I don't think you can understate that part of it. It was interesting, though. I did talk to Bill Guerin a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the Wild had hit a bit of a slide. And
we're gonna cut you off quickly here, Scott. We do have a little bit of breaking news. I can see our insider cam is shuffling, so we're gonna cut away quickly.
Perfect.
Frank Saravalli, what do you got for us?
Hey guys, hearing that the Edmonton Oilers have their left shot defenseman and they are going to be acquiring Brett Kulak from the Montreal Canadiens. Interested to see what the ask or the return is. Don't have those details yet, but the Montreal Canadiens were certainly interested in hanging on to Brett Kulak, not necessarily looking to move him. They were kind of waiting, listening, seeing if someone would step up and pay the price that they were looking for. I think the initial ask was a 2nd-round pick for Brett Kulak. So Kulak is going from the Montreal Canadiens to the Edmonton Oilers. They get their left shot defenseman, and at a price point on the salary cap that certainly works for Ken Holland and the Oilers moving forward.
Perfect. So the reported asking price, a 2nd rounder, nothing confirmed yet on what the Habs are getting back in this, but Brett Kulak going to the Edmonton Oilers. Frank Saravalli has it first. Kulak, 28-year-old left shot defenseman, a pending UFA, $1.8 million on the cap. He was number 46 on our trade deadline trade targets list. Let's get ready here and get some instant analysis with Pete Blackburn of Bally Sports. Brett Kulak going over to the Edmonton Oilers, a left shot D-man. That's an area that I think it was kind of the general expectation. That's what the Oilers would do. And Pete, your thoughts on this deal, and also your thoughts on a team with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Brett Kulak is probably the big splash that their GM is making.
I hope he's not the big splash. I mean, it's a nice ad. Obviously they were in the market for that, and I think he probably does help. We'll wait to see the return. And people love to criticize Ken Holland for going out and being super aggressive and maybe getting the wrong guys sometimes. But I think that Kulak could be a good ad. But if he's your big splash, especially given the place that the Oilers are in, it's probably not the best deadline day. That's all I'll say.
So Brett Kulak going out of Montreal. He was one of those few pending UFAs that they did have to move. If you were in charge in Montreal, would you be looking to move guys like Lehkonen and some of the pending RFAs that they have on that list? Or do you think maybe Montreal will be a little bit quiet now up until the end of the deadline?
I think that they got to make trades that, if guys don't fit into their future plans, then obviously now's a good time to kick off the rebuild a little bit. And, I don't know how aggressive the rebuild is going to be, but, you obviously have had a change in direction with that franchise, both in the front office and behind the bench. And it's also going to come to the roster. So you have to kind of sit down and figure out who fits into your plans with the new guys that are in charge there. And if there's anybody that you're not necessarily crazy about, I think you take offers on them, see what you can get for them, and start stockpiling future assets to build around.
Thank you very much for that insight, Pete. Once again, it's Brett Kulak going from the Montreal Canadiens to the Edmonton Oilers, a pair of Canadian teams linking up here. The ask, like Frank said, was reportedly a second-round pick. We were waiting on confirmation of the return there. Brett Kulak, a left-handed defenseman who should fit in pretty nice for the Edmonton Oilers. We'll get to our gears grades in just a second on this deal. Brett Kulak, where he'll slot in for the Edmonton Oilers. Well, on their left side, they have Darnell Nurse and Duncan Keith already. Chris Russell was playing some third-pairing left D for the Oilers, obviously expecting Brett Kulak to slide into that spot. The right side of their blue line, Cody Ceci, Evan Bouchard, and Tyson Barrie. Let's grade this deal up with former Vancouver Canucks AGM Chris Gear. Gears Grades brought to you by 3Ice. Head to 3ice.com and hit the tickets tab for more info. Chris Gear, this deal just coming down the pipe. What do you think and what do you grade the Oilers acquiring Brett Kulak?
Kulak's a piece that's going to be a nice fit there. He's a very steady defenseman. He's not a world beater. He's not going to rack up points, but he's going to be a good support piece for Edmonton on their blue line. And let's not forget, Edmonton did make a splash earlier in the deadline, or earlier in the season, actually, by getting Evander Kane. So, if people talk about Ken Holland being quiet right now, he definitely made a splash a few weeks ago when he acquired Kane. So if the piece going back for Kulak is a second rounder, I think that's a fair deal. I think Edmonton still has a lot of its draft capital. They haven't given up first or seconds before, so this is probably something that they can live with, they can stomach, and it helps their push. There's still not a lock to get into the playoffs, but they're pretty close now, and this will definitely help help their playoff push. So, like you said, a team with McDavid and Draisaitl has to get in. They can't have those two guys on the sidelines for the playoffs. So, any little piece that they can add to make that push a little bit harder and a little bit firmer, then I think Kulak helps that, and that's a solid B in my opinion.
Yeah, and like I said, it's kind of the perfect fit for the Edmonton Oilers in terms of what they needed. We'll see if Ken Holland has anything else up his sleeve from an Oilers perspective, but a good defensive third pairing kind of D-man. I think that's exactly what a lot of Oilers fans, at least, were expecting their GM to do, and we get it pretty early on in the afternoon as well, with still 2 hours and 23 minutes to go until the deadline. Let's head back to Mike McKenna and Scott Burnside here and dig into this a little bit more, but to me, and Chris Gear kind of mentioned it, the Oilers haven't dealt a ton of picks. They lost their fourth rounder in a deal for Dmitry Kulikov. That happened at the last deadline. Their third rounder this year was given up in the Duncan Keith deal, and there is a condition on that. So their second rounder this year is likely tied up as well. So we'll see. If it is a second, it might be the one in 2023, but we're still waiting on confirmation on the return there. But Mike McKenna, your thoughts on Brett Kulak going to the Edmonton Oilers?
Honestly, man, it's kind of just ho-hum to me, and I don't mean this to be that the Edmonton Oilers have to make a huge splash and go out and grab a number one defenseman, but, are they adding depth? Yeah. Are they adding a manageable cap hit? Yeah, they're doing that. But is Kulak going to be the piece that fixes the Oilers defensively? It gives them some depth, yes. But, I think every team's trying to uncover these little deals that they can find to improve their club, and I look where he may slot in, you're kind of filling that same role as others there. So it's fine. I like it. To me, it's another one of those deals that you're just getting a player here to make a marginal improvement, and you need to do those things. I just think that the depth on Edmonton's blue line is missing enough that how much is this going to help? So I guess maybe I'm just not as enthused about it. I think it's a fine trade. I just don't think it's going to make much of a difference for that club.
Fair enough. Scott Burnside, are you maybe a little bit more optimistic on this?
Listen, I'm totally a glass half full guy, and I'm with Mike, right? Like, I mean, you have to keep these things in perspective, and I think about, as Chris mentioned earlier in doing the grades. Listen, you've already added the power forward in Evander Kane. I think the early returns are fine on that front, and this is an Oiler team. Where do they fit into the playoff spot? Are they into that wild card spot where you're now looking at playing either Colorado or Calgary in the first round? You have to be much better defensively. It's the risk of sounding the obvious. It's all going to come back to the goaltending for the Oilers. What kind of goaltending are they going to get down the stretch that allows them to stay in the top 8 in the West? And then what happens come playoff time? But, to me, Brett Kulak is a guy. Is he a guy that sort of comes and goes and you don't really notice that he was there for this Oiler team? Or does he become a guy like whether a Zach Bogosian in Tampa, who was cast off by Buffalo and ends up playing a lot with Victor Hedman in Cup run 2 years ago? Is he a Michael Kempney who comes from Chicago to Washington, ends up playing with John Carlson, and the Caps go on to win a Stanley Cup in 2018? I'm not suggesting that the Oilers are at that place in their evolution, but I think Brett Kulak is one of those players that has the potential to help tighten things up. He can play up and down that group on the left side. It's going to be interesting to see how he's employed by the coaching staff in Edmonton. But I don't mind it. I still think I don't think there's a goaltending answer for the Edmonton Oilers. Either the answer is in that room right now or it's not, and that'll be the determining factor on whether they make the playoffs and whether they have the team that could create an upset or two along the way. So, but I say good on Brett Kulak. Enjoy Edmonton.
In the Western Conference, obviously one of those teams that's going to be, a little bit lower down in the playoff picture, but one team sitting up at the top that, yes, they went out and got Josh Manson, but nothing over the last couple of days from the Colorado Avalanche. And is that surprising to either of you, Mike? Like, I mean, we're hearing, there were some rumors out there on Twitter. Maybe they're a team that's looking at a guy like Adam Lowry. But for me personally, I would imagine Joe Sakic is sitting there with a bit of an itchy trigger finger going, man, I'm watching all these teams load up, and I've been sitting on my hands now for a couple of days.
I think you have to look no further than the Tampa Bay Lightning and how creative they've been to be able to pull off some of the trades they have and make their team better when they're already an incredibly good club in South Florida, in Tampa Bay. I mean, like, you've got Hagel coming in now. You've got Nick Paul coming in. And you essentially give away, I know there's draft picks involved, but like Radish, Kachuk, where did they fit in long-term with Tampa? Not really sure. Matthew Joseph's a good hockey player, but you're getting more out of Hagel and Paul than you are out of those three. And when you have the capital to do it with draft picks, with some other young players, you pull that off. And if you're thinking about Colorado, you're like, man, okay, well, we did add Manson. We filled a hole in the defense. And we've added a bit of grit. You're bringing Sturm in. And I like Jost a lot, but if you're looking for a fourth-line center, he may not have been the right fit for that club in a playoff series. I've thought all along that Colorado needed a bit more in their bottom six. I think their top six is good, but now you're starting to see even the best teams load up with more offense. So I think if I'm Joe Sakic, I'm leery of trying to make a big swing just to make a big swing, because what's available that's left that can do that. They lost out on Claude Giroux. He decided Florida was his destination. That's a really good club in Colorado, and I like the moves that they've made. We just haven't seen the creativity come through like we have with the Tampa Bay, who's managing every single penny on that salary cap, using up everything they can to bring in and make that club as good as possible. So maybe, Scott, you might have a different feel on it, but I think Colorado, for me, at this stage is probably pretty close to set. But I think that like every other team, they'd like to add a little bit more offensive depth if that's possible now. I think they've got the grit, I think they've got their D, and I think they're set in goal. So not sure what's available, but they still may take a swing at it.
Yeah, I think it's always, and it's interesting being here in Carolina and spent some time with Don Waddell, the GM here, of a very good Carolina team. And I think you're absolutely right. I love the Josh Manson ad because I think it addressed, when you go back to the playoff series loss against Las Vegas last year in the second round, it's a team that got pushed around a little bit, and I think they're in a much better position now. Obviously, having Eric Johnson back in the lineup, and the ad of Josh Manson, I think is, it addresses those kinds of elements. And I think you have to ask yourself when you look in your room, what do you? Let's say you take a swing at an Andrew Kopp, or I'm not sure if Rickard Rakell really fits that sort of bottom six, element that we're talking about with Colorado, but a player like that, can you have too much? Maybe you can never have too much, but I think you always have to look at the ripple effect of what happens when that player comes in. Where do you fit him in? Who pays the price in terms of their ice time? Maybe pays the price in playing on a second power play unit. If you like what people are doing for you now, by adding someone else that disrupts that, I think that's a real thing. But let me ask you, Mike, you've been in lots more locker rooms than I have. But my sense is, I know that's the discussion going on in Carolina is what, you like what you have. And when you add, it always changes it. And maybe it never, maybe it's not a dramatic negative thing, but if it changes it enough, is the process worth it? Now, does that make any sense to you?
Well, yeah, I actually wrote about it this week, how I would be cautious if I was Joe Sakic. I didn't really like Drew as a fit in Colorado. I thought that would have been too much of a swing for a club that's so well oiled defensively, not just in their lines, but in their power play. I mean, how do you make that harmonious? What's the cascade effect? I mean, I've seen it before with players remain on a team past trade deadline, but the team makes a move on a big name player that effectively shuffles them down or even out of a lineup. And it's hard to get those players to get their head around it, that you've been replaced by somebody better, even though you may have put up 15 or 20 goals for a team this season, you're getting bumped down the lineup. It can create uneasiness and animosity. It doesn't always give the right message to players, even though it really should. Hey, we're making the team better. We're trying to win the Stanley Cup. There's that feeling of disrespect involved with it sometimes. So I'm not sure that would be the case in Colorado, but you're trying to make things harmonious. And again, like, chemistry is a lot, and you've already built up 60 games worth of it during a season. And if you're going to try to find new chemistry in the last 20 games, that's not always an easy task. And sometimes it takes you until the first round of playoffs to do that, and by then you're already bounced. You don't get long. You don't get much time to get it together. And you need that to happen before the first round of playoffs, because you don't want to be figuring it out once you're starting to go.
So I want to ask you this because I'm curious about
Scott,
the whole.
I'm just going to jump in. You got another piece of breaking news just coming down the pipe here. Let's get to our insider cam and bring in Frank Saravalli. Frank, do we have another D-man on the move?
We do. I can confirm that the Philadelphia Flyers are sending defenseman Justin Braun to the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2023 third-round pick. So Braun, one of just 4 right-shot defensemen that was on our Daily Faceoff trade targets top 50 heading into today. He is on the move, and the nice thing about the New York Rangers and Braun is that he can play on either side. So they've got lots of options. Certainly their right side can get pretty crowded when it comes to Jacob Trouba and Adam Fox there. Braun can play on the right. If you need, he can play on the left as well. So nice little pickup for the New York Rangers, who were looking in depth defenseman world. We'll see if they have anything else left up their sleeve. And just a quick update for you as we await the return on the Brett Kulak trade heading from the Montreal Canadiens to the Edmonton Oilers. I'm told that that trade call has not yet happened. It will happen, no doubt about that. The Montreal Canadiens just have something else in the hopper first, so working on what that is at the moment.
Interesting. So the Montreal Canadiens are indeed not done quite yet with 2 hours and 12 minutes to go until the deadline day. Thank you very much, Frank. Minor deal to report as well. Looks like from a few reports that Alex Biega is going from the Toronto Maple Leafs to the Nashville Predators. So a smaller kind of depth move. Sounds like future considerations involved there. Let's get to some instant reaction now to this deal. Justin Braun going to the New York Rangers. It's a third-round pick going back the other way. And Pete Blackburn, I think the third-round pick here, the value seems pretty fair. A rental D-man, third-round pick. Braun, like Frank says, brings some versatility to this Rangers blue line. Not exactly the sexiest splash, but I think a solid move for the Rangers here.
Yeah, I would love for the opportunity to absolutely dump on a trade and spew some hate, but we've got nothing so far. I mean, it's a pretty good deal for both sides. Obviously, the Rangers want some help defensively, and they get that in a nice depth piece for Justin Braun. And like Frank said, the right side of the market is pretty thin for help there. And, there is versatility involved with Justin Braun, and he's been pretty good defensively. And, he's obviously not a perfect player, and he's not going to completely revamp what the Rangers look like, but they absolutely need help in front of Igor, and they should get it here. And so, not a bad deal, nothing to hate. They didn't overpay, so I can't hate on it.
Yeah, looking over in our YouTube chat right now, Kyler says Braun for a third will be pretty frustrated if the Oilers gave up a second for Kulak. A lot of people in the YouTube speculating if those two returns could maybe be similar, but like Frank said, we're waiting on potentially another shoe to drop here in Montreal. If you were the New York Rangers right now, I mean, their blue line looks pretty solid. Like, I'm just looking at the daily faceoff kind of line chart here. Lindgren with Fox, Keandre Miller with Trouba. You would imagine Braun slides into that third pairing with either Nemeth or Braden Schneider. Looking up front, they also got Frank Vetrano earlier in the week from the Panthers. You think the Rangers could be done here, or do you think they could benefit from maybe making another splash? Like, they're in a unique spot because they have some cap space here. They're kind of in what appears to be the early part of maybe their window opening up. So it's interesting to see the way Chris Drury could potentially take this.
Yeah, it seems like they're in a spot where they have the opportunity to take a big swing if they want to, or if the opportunity presents itself. But again, they're sort of at the beginning of their window here, so there's no big pressure to make a dumb deal, and so it's a situation where they could be done, but also a situation where I would imagine that they're keeping their ear on the phone and making some inquiries and seeing what can be had, because they could certainly not be done if there's an opportunity to improve down the stretch here.
Perfect. Great stuff, Pete. We'll chat to you the next time we get a deal coming down the pipe. And as we do, let's get some grades on this bad boy here. Justin Braun, it's a 2023 third-round pick going to Philly. The veteran D-man who, like Frank said, can play both sides, going the other way to the Rangers. So Chris Drury gets in on the deadline day action. Chris Gear, what are you grading this deal on either side?
Well, just before we get to Braun, I just want to quickly touch on Alex Biega, one of the best guys you will meet in the game of hockey, and really glad that he's going to get another opportunity to maybe contribute to Nashville here. The Bulldog lives to fight another day, and absolutely sensational guy. Justin Braun, I think this is a solid pickup for the Rangers. The thing I like best about Braun is a guy that's 35 years old. He's played almost 800 games in the NHL, and he's joining a defense where you've got Adam Fox, Keandre Miller, Braden Schneider, who's the other young guy they've got? Anyway, they're a young defense, and so anytime you can add a guy, Lindgren is the other guy. So anytime you can add a guy with this experience, and just I think it helps them as much off the ice as it does on the ice, right? He'll be a solid addition to their third pair, but just that veteran experience in the dressing room and the ability to maybe calm those guys down as they go through their first playoff for a couple of them. So I think, solid pickup. And to only give up a third, that's a little better than we heard from on the Kulak deal. So let's go with a B+ on that.
A B+ is the grade on the Braun deal. He was number 7 on our trade targets list. So a couple of D-men being moved over on our YouTube stream. Daniel Falconer, I'd love to see a Nick Leddy deal announced before time's up. Hopefully worth a third like the others, assuming Daniel is a Wings fan here. Chris, appreciate the insight there. Like I said earlier, we do have our countdown 5 best and 5 worst deadline deals. Matt Larkin handled this one, looking back through a handful of seasons to get this list together. Let's get this countdown rolling with number 5 on our best and worst trades.
Hey everybody, Matt Larkin here, counting down my 5 worst trade deadline deals of the salary cap era. At number 5, in 2016, the Chicago Blackhawks, looking to get some depth, trying to repeat as Cup champions. They get Dale Weiss and Thomas Fleischmann from the Montreal Canadiens, but they give up their first-round pick from the past, Philip Deneau. It seemed like it made sense to them at the time. He wasn't climbing that depth chart. He goes to Montreal, where, of course, he blossoms into one of the premier shutdown centers in the NHL, helps key that 2021 Cinderella run to the Stanley Cup final. He does leave, of course, as UFA, but he does deliver some great years, some great possession numbers, centering Montreal's top line. That is a trade that the Blackhawks certainly would have liked to have back. Hey everybody, Matt Larkin here, counting down my top 5 trade deadline deals of the salary cap era. At number 5, we have the 2009 Bill Guerin trade. The Islanders trade Bill Guerin to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and this is the classic bringing in the veteran to help the room. Bill Guerin, he does contribute 15 points in the playoffs, so he adds something to the score sheet, but he brings those intangibles. It's a Penguins team that came so close the year before, lost in the Stanley Cup final. They get Bill Guerin, a guy who already had a Stanley Cup ring. He keeps the dressing room loose. The Penguins players talk about how much humor he brings to the dressing room. He helps them through those tough, high-stakes moments, and they break through. They win the first Stanley Cup of the Crosby-Malkin era.
Let's keep moving along here with our deadline coverage. We're going to have the rest of that countdown mixed in throughout the show today. Looking back through what we've seen today, just a quick recap of the deals that have gone down. It started at 6:02 a.m. Eastern is the first deal. It was Nathan Beaulieu, and he got traded for a 7th-round pick, Pittsburgh and Winnipeg. Swapping there, the contract of Brian Little and prospect Nathan Smith went to the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for a 4th-rounder that went back to Winnipeg. Marcus Johansson reunited back with the Washington Capitals. The return there for the Seattle Kraken. Daniel Sprong, a 4th-rounder and a 6th-rounder in that deal. Then it was the big one at 11:07 a.m. Eastern Time. Marc-Andre Fleury finding his way to the Minnesota Wild in exchange for a 2022 conditional 2nd-round pick. There are conditions on if Minnesota is able to get to the conference final there. And then Minnesota suddenly found themselves with too many goaltenders on their hands, and they flipped Kaapo Kähkönen and a 5th-round pick to the San Jose Sharks. Defenseman Jacob Middleton going back for the Minnesota Wild. Brett Kulak just about 20 minutes ago from the Montreal Canadiens to the Edmonton Oilers. We still don't have word on a return on that deal. Like Frank Saravalli reported, there could be another move coming down for the Canadiens there, but the Brett Kulak deal will happen. Alex Biega, depth move going to the Nashville Predators for future considerations from the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Rangers acquired D-man Justin Braun in exchange for a 3rd-rounder, so Philly begins their deadline sell-off there as well. They also moved Claude Giroux earlier in the week. Obviously, let's get back to our main panel here with Mike McKenna and Scott Burnside. I just rattled off a whole bunch of moves that we've seen so far today. A couple of D-men getting moved. For me personally, I'm a big fan of what Minnesota did, flipping Kaapo Kähkönen, not just for, like a conditional 2nd or a conditional 3rd. Like, GM Bill Guerin is clearly in win now mode, and I think finding a way to move Kähkönen, who at this point was essentially a spare part for them, and getting a really useful piece in Jacob Middleton back, I think that's a really nice piece of work. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, no, I agree, Tyler. And I think, Chris alluded to it earlier. I mean, this is a Minnesota team that is going to start to pay a heavy penalty for buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter starting next year. I like the idea that, it's about balancing for Bill Guerin now, right? Because when you have these kinds of penalties coming up, you have to have players coming up through your pipeline. You have to be able to have young players who can come in and not just play NHL hockey for you, but do so at a modest price against the cap. So, but I think the moment is right in front of this Minnesota Wild team. I talked to Bill Guerin not too long ago when the team had really hit a sideways spell, and he liked what his team was doing. He said, listen, we're not trading our way out of this, although he may have traded their way into a very competitive first round matchup. You know what I think about when I think of the Minnesota Wild and I think of the setup in the West? It's so critical for the teams to, especially in the Central, if you can stay in that 2-3 hole. I'm looking at a Minnesota-St. Louis first round matchup. I think that's probably how it's going to shake down, but Nashville has really closed the gap. So if you can avoid dropping into the wild card and avoid playing the two dominant teams in the West, Colorado or Calgary, I think those are obvious. If you avoid playing those teams as long as you can, that's a good thing. And I think for Minnesota, this is an opportunity. I think they match up very well against both St. Louis and Nashville. Nashville's identity is completely different than it was the last 2 or 3 years. Very hard to play against. Those three teams are very similar, I think, in terms of how they approach the game. Rely on four lines. They play a much heavier game. Very good, deep blue lines on both sides or all three sides of that. So I like the idea of what Bill Guerin has done. He shored up his goaltending. As you mentioned, Tyler, being able to move Kakkonen, who was a spare part then for an actual player. That's good work. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that middle section of the Central shakes out in that 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 hole. If Winnipeg can continue to stay in the hunt for the one of the 2 wildcard spots.
Mike, quickly, 30 seconds, your take there. Oh, looks like we got Mike on mute.
There we go. So,
Yeah,
you bring in Marc-Andre Fleury. I just want to go there more than anything else. Okay. Remember who beat the Minnesota Wild last year in Game 7 against the Vegas Golden Knights? It was Marc-Andre Fleury. And I think Minnesota's had question marks all year in goal. Like, I think they like Talbot. I like Talbot. But Talbot and Fleury is a lot different than Kakkonen and Talbot. And I think the undercover piece here was Bill Guerin grabbing Jacob Middleton, who had value on the market. There are a lot of teams that were interested in him. So you're building up and you're grabbing depth here to help the club forward. I think it's good. I mean, I'm really impressed with what has happened so far.
All right, we're going to get into the first of our set of interviews here. And Scott had a chance to chat with Jay Feaster, former NHL general manager, about what deadline day is like from the perspective of a man in charge. Here's Scott Burnside with Jay Feaster.
This, Jay, is an absolute treat for me. I had to look up your new title now, Senior Vice President of Legal and Business Affairs with the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's a great title, by the way.
It's sort of full circle to when I started my career. I graduated from Georgetown University Law Center back in 1987 and went to work for a law firm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania called McKenna, Wallace and Nurek. And it was there that I did a lot of work for Hershey Entertainment and Resort Company.
Right.
And ultimately went in-house there as the assistant to the president and then the hockey opportunity. And I've been doing hockey really ever since, till I came back here in the nonprofit capacity in community hockey for the last 7 years. And now, back to doing legal. So
when you think back to leading up to that playoff run in 2004, it just stepping back and you look at the trade deadline period, is it like seem like a million miles away in terms of the attention and the buzz? And like when you think of trade deadline now compared to when you were putting together that Stanley Cup winner in 2004.
Yeah, the attention that is focused on it now. I mean, there's certainly attention focused on it back then too, but I was a contrarian in that I never wanted to wait until the deadline. I didn't want to. I wasn't looking to make the big news splash on the deadline day or the day before and kick things off. I always wanted to try to improve our team well ahead of time.
A lot of time has passed. The game is different. That happens before there's a salary cap. So,
yeah.
But I think of what the Bolts have done and what Julian Brisebois has done the last couple of years. And it strikes me that there are some parallels, right? I mean, that Julian identified a very specific need for your team the last 2 years, went out, it wasn't cheap, but identified those needs, filled the needs, and here you are with back-to-back cup wins. Do you see some of that?
Yeah, I do. You know what? And I give Julian, I respect him and think so highly of the work that he's done. There was no doubt in my mind that after we got knocked out in the first round by Columbus, what was that, 2018, 2019?
3 years ago, 2019,
2019, that we had to get harder to play against.
Yeah.
We just had to get harder to play against. And so, what does he do? I mean, he goes out and he gets the Barclay Gaudreaus and the Colemans and the Pat Maroons. And without those guys, we don't win. And I remember at the time when he did the deals, everybody's bemoaning, oh, it's a first round pick. You're giving up a first round pick. Yeah, I get it. But when you have a team that's as talented as this Lightning team was at the time, and you identify as a management group and a coaching staff, your hockey ops people identify, this is what we need. Hey, when you're skating that trophy around and when you have all the residuals from having won that cup, with your fan base and your sponsors and the whole bit, you're not sitting there bemoaning that, oh yeah, but we don't have a first. We don't have a first that would have been at the very end of the first round. You just don't. So I think he's done a masterful job.
You had back-to-back cups, couple parades in a row, man. It's worked out pretty well. But Jay, it's always a treat to catch up with you, and thank you so much for sharing your insight and your memories. To me, it's a pretty special time of the NHL season, and thanks for spending some of it with me.
My pleasure, Scott.
The Daily Faceoff Trade Deadline Show. We are 1 hour into our deadline coverage. As you can see at the top of the screen, 1 hour and 55 minutes to go until the trade deadline. And we'll be with you for about 30 minutes after the deadline hits, as well as trades continue to trickle in. If you're just joining us, yes, that is a live cam up in the top right-hand corner on our man, Frank Saravalli. He's been breaking trades. He's been busy. He's been pulling his weight. I love it. But we're also we're making a bit of a trade here. We're doing our own trade deadline move, and it's going to be temporary, but we are indeed, yes, sources confirming, Scott Burnside and Mike McKenna being moved off the main panel, and our friend Ryan Clark is coming in from The Athletic. Excited to be joined by Ryan Clark here. Ryan, have you ever been traded on deadline day?
No, can't say that I have, but thank you. I guess that's a pretty cool thing. Disappointed that the GM, Frank Saravalli, couldn't be here to give me a sweater, but, I see how it is. We'll talk come to contract time. No, I'm kidding, but seriously, thanks for having me.
Excited to have you on the show here, Ryan. Let's start out in your neck of the woods, out in Seattle, where Daniel Sprong, a 4th and a 6th, come back. Marcus Johansson going out the other way. What do you think of this piece of work from Ron Francis?
It goes back to the theme that the Kraken have had really since trading Kalle Järnkrok, which has been get draft capital. And so when you look at where they are at now, currently the Kraken have more draft picks over the next 3 years than they have players under contract throughout their entire organization, NHL, AHL, you name it. And so with them, it's about looking at what you can do going forward, because when you think about where this team is, they started Saturday night in last place because the Montreal Canadiens, of course, won their game. The Kraken winning and beating the Red Wings suddenly puts them in 31st as opposed to 32nd place, but they're out of last place by a point. So the fact that they are a point away from being in position to have the best odds to take the first pick, the fact that they are moving on from players and getting draft picks, it shows that they are looking towards the future. Now, what that future will be, it's really kind of whatever they want, because either they can use those picks to trade players and possibly get players in, or they could just use it to build through the draft, which is something Ron Francis has talked about quite a bit.
Looking at our daily face-off trade targets list, the obviously big one was Marc-Andre Fleury being moved earlier today. But after that, you got Andrew Kopp, Nick Leddy, Ricard Raquel, Max Domi rounding out the top 5 here. When you look at those names, is there one that really stands out to you as someone who, could maybe be a real good ad for a contender? And do you maybe see a potential fit that makes sense with any of these names?
Well, you look at Andrew Kopp, and that's a name that people just keep coming back to because, again, you look at the versatility that he provides. Not only that, but like compared to some of the other figures we've seen, it is an extremely manageable AAV at 3.64. In terms of names that keep coming up, of course, the Colorado Avalanche are one that keeps coming up because you think about them trying to be in it for the Claude Giroux sweepstakes. Of course, that doesn't work out. So maybe they turn their attention towards an Andrew Kopp. But then you also look at someone like Nick Leddy. And if you're a team that's looking for a defenseman, Leddy's AAV, yes, is 5.5, but at the same time, you know what you're getting. You're getting someone who definitely has playoff experience, can be a puck mover, can operate for you in a top 4, if not 5 role. So again, it's looking at the need that's out there. Of course, you heard about the Blues being a team that were potentially looking around at getting a defenseman, so maybe that's a fit there. Who knows? But either way, it still comes back to this. There are going to be options between now and when the final buzzer does sound.
And it's really interesting as well. Like you talked, we're touching on so many teams in the Central here with the Avalanche. What could they potentially do after acquiring Manson? And a team like St. Louis, they don't want to sit still for very much longer. They're probably itching to get something done. And I talked to Pete Blackburn about this earlier, but in the East, right, there's that division, Florida, Tampa, Toronto, Boston. They've all been busy. Okay, well, 2 of them are very likely, one of them for sure, and likely 2 of them are going home in round 1. And I think when you look at the West as well, it's going to be that similar thing where like Minnesota has now paid a massive price for Marc-Andre Fleury. If St. Louis gets involved, if Colorado makes another ad, like not all these teams can win. It is fascinating how here on deadline day, you see these moves go down, you go, yep, they're a contender. But with the way the NHL playoff structure kind of is with staying in your division, there are going to be a lot of teams who look back on this day and go, yeah, maybe we should have sat still for a little bit.
It's interesting you say that just because one of the complaints people had, depending on where you looked on social, about the Kraken's trade for Mark Giordano is they felt they could have received more. But when you look at it from the perspective of the buyer being the Toronto Maple Leafs, let's think about what they did last year when they gave up a lot for Nick Foligno. Yes, it was a move that worked for the first 4 games. He got an assist in each one of those games. But of course, he suffers a back injury. He's only able to play in 4 or 7 games against the Montreal Canadiens. And the Leafs get knocked out in the first round. And suddenly you're without your first pick and 2 other draft picks staggered over 2 separate years. And when you're the Leafs and you take a step back, that's where you have to be smart about what is a proper return for what you want to go get. Because for them, they're in a situation where A, 2 of their last 3 drafts have not had a first round pick. B, this coming draft, they currently have 3 picks. One of them is their first round. They're way constructed. They need to hit on draft picks, or at least picks, because there needs to maximize those cap dollars, especially those guys who are on entry-level deals or on cheaper contracts, so that way it can sort of supplement what you have with those higher-priced deals. And that's just the thing. Like, if you're a team that's going all in, of course it's something you think about. Like, if you're the Florida Panthers, here's the reality of their situation. This will be the first time in franchise history the Florida Panthers have made the playoffs in 3 straight years. Like, that's never happened before. And when you look at what they've done to get to this point, and how Bill Zito and that front office has built their team in this image, it's never, ever really been like this. Like, there have been years where, of course, you look at the Panthers and you go, they're a piece or 2 away. And when they have made the playoffs, you said, okay, maybe this can be something eventually. But right now, this is about as good of a shot as they've had really since that Cup final run in 1996. And if you're them, you have to go in for it because, like you said at the beginning of this segment, when you look at all the other teams that are out there that are making moves, you have to do it. But not only that, but in the case of the Bruins, it's not just a move that they made now for Hampus Lindholm. Like, that's a long-term commitment that lets you or really anyone else in the East competing know, like, this is the reality. And so, yeah, it's an arms race because people feel like they have to do these things. But then the amazing part is when you look at what Tampa is able to pull off, that's the other element. So you have to be on your game if you're a GM right now.
We have our friend Matt Larkin counting down the 5 best and 5 worst deals in deadline history. When you hear that, 5 or the best and worst deals of deadline history, in your mind, what are some deals that jump out to you? Or maybe a deal that you remember it coming down and it just totally blew your mind, caught you off guard? What are some memorable deadline deals you have?
you could honestly argue everything Tampa did last year just because we all remember, okay, how are they going to make this work with LTIR? And then like they find a way to make it work. And it kind of reminds you of that scene in Armageddon where Bruce Willis is like, you're NASA. You have guys thinking stuff up, and then you have guys behind them thinking stuff up. And it seems like that's kind of the Tampa Bay Lightning. In terms of worst trades, it's hard to say off the top of your head just because it's the idea that every team who makes a trade thinks that they have a legitimate shot to win it. Now, whether or not that actually happens, that's a different question. So in terms of worst, there's not necessarily one that comes to mind. But when you think about like defining trades, it's interesting because when I covered the Avs, and this was again kind of at the beginning stages of when they were starting to become a consistent playoff team, people in Denver were like, when are they going to make that Marian Hossa trade? And that's just it. It's like people talk about making that type of trade where you get that piece you think can push you over the limit. But at the same time, you have to have a team that's in position to go do that. And so, like, let's again go back to a team like the Florida Panthers. A year ago this time, like, yes, they had some really good pieces. They looked like they knew what they were going to do. But when you look at where they are now, they are at the point where it's just like, yes, getting Claude Giroux, getting Ben Sherratt, like it is put them in a position where they look like an overwhelming favorite. But again, we won't know what the end result will be until the playoffs are over. And that's, again, the scary part if you're a GM is like, you're doing all this hoping that it works, but it's also with the understanding of everybody else is also trying to win.
Let's stick with that theme here, Ryan. You stay right where you are. Let's go to number 4 on our countdown, Matt Larkin's best and worst trades of deadline day.
At number 4 on the worst trade list, we have the 2018 trade that sent Thomas Tatar to the Vegas Golden Knights for a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a third-round pick. It's easy to remember 2017-18 as the magical season in which everything went right for Vegas. It almost did. But that Tatar trade, my friends, was a disaster. He was a poor fit. He ended up in Gerard Galland's doghouse pretty much. He was a healthy scratch as much as he played during that playoff run, was sort of a passenger. Yes, Vegas got out of it by including Tatar in the Max Pacioretty trade. But if we isolate that deal, it went horribly for Vegas in the moment. At number 4 on the best trade list, we have the 2014 deal that sent Marian Gaborik from the Columbus Blue Jackets to the LA Kings, helping key the Kings' second Stanley Cup in a 3-year run. Sometimes you get that role player at the deadline. Sometimes you get someone who comes in and just goes gangbusters. Gaborik joins that top line with Anze Kopitar. Pretty decent finish to the regular season. Goes absolutely nuts. Leads the playoffs with 14 goals, including 11 at even strength. You can criticize Dean Lombardi for giving that big contract to Gaborik after, which didn't go well. But if we're looking at the trade just as a deadline deal, as a rental, it could not have gone better. What a trade for the LA Kings.
That is number 4 on our countdown of the best and worst deals. And going back to our friend Ryan S. Clark from The Athletic, of course, covers the Seattle Kraken like a blanket. And also, we're going to bring in, let's bring in our boy Matt Larkin as well for a look at our Manscaped trade targets list. Manscaped, the global leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. They got the Lawnmower 4.0. Not only is it waterproof, it's got an LED light as well. It is built for all sorts of situations. We got a promo code DFO Deadline, gets you 20% off and free shipping. Ryan Clark, you are absolutely loving being involved in a segment that is sponsored by our friends at Manscaped. But to the both of you here, I'm looking down the list, and one name that's just beyond intriguing to me because we've seen him do great things in the playoffs before, and that's Phil Kessel. He's number 29 on our list. He's got that big $6.8 million AAV. There would have to be money retained no matter really where he goes in terms of a contender. But I'll start with you on this one, Matt. What do you think Phil Kessel, even though he's 34 years old, can still bring to a contender? And is there a team out there that you look at and go, I kind of like them as a fit?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I do think that Phil Kessel, he still has those mitts. They haven't gone anywhere. I know the goal-scoring touch has not been there this season, but he still has a great release. And I think one of the key characteristics of his career, he's always been underrated as a playmaker. We've seen that side of him more, I think, in Arizona, sort of stepping aside, setting up his younger teammates. So I think because of that, he's actually kind of versatile. You can put him in maybe in middle six, probably a second line role would be ideal for him. And the funny thing is, I know there were talks about Phil Kessel and Mike Sullivan not always getting along, but if there's a team that actually needs a second line winger right now, I think it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think a reunion there would be very interesting.
Yeah, that would be a fascinating fit. Phil Kessel, 29 on our list. Ryan Clark, what do you think of the idea of a contender maybe going out and getting Phil the thrill?
At this point in the year, what we always talk about is secondary scoring. I mean, yes, you have teams with top lines that you know are going to be productive, but what does your middle six look like? And that sometimes can often be the big difference between what you can and can't do. It's why we look at Tampa's success, and yes, for all the Stamkos and Points and Kucherov and Hedman and everyone else that's turned out to be a cornerstone there, you have to have these players like a Yanni Gord, Blake Coleman, Andre Palat, these secondary, tertiary players. And if you're a team looking for that, Phil Kessel looks like he could provide you that. Because I guess it's Matt's point about what he said about playmaking, but again, it's also still the shot. You have someone who knows what it's like to be in that environment, but at the end of the day, it's also the fact that you have another threat on the ice. And if you can roll out 3 or 4 lines where there are consistent threats, that's only going to make you more dangerous.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. Like, you're right. We spend so much time talking about those high-end pieces, but it oftentimes is those third or fourth line, those secondary sources of scoring that carry teams throughout a playoff series as well. Sticking with our trade targets list, I'm also intrigued by some of the players on this list who have years of team control. Like a Tyler Bertuzzi being on this list from Detroit is fascinating me. He's having such a great year. The vaccination status obviously would take some teams out of the mix. Like, I don't think a Canadian team is giving up what it takes to get Tyler Bertuzzi just based on that alone. The fact that he would only really be able to play your home games. And you keep going down the list. You got a guy like Connor Garland in Vancouver who comes in at number 12. Brock Besser, he's a pending RFA. He's going to have a pretty big qualifying offer. $7.5 million is the minimum qualifying offer for a guy like Brock Besser. Jesper Bratt is 15 on the list. He's a pending RFA as well. Other notables in the top 20 are Travis Konechny and Pavel Zacha, rattling off sort of those young forwards. Like, they're intriguing to me because, yes, a contender would love these guys, but I also look lower down the standings and a team like New Jersey, and I think there's really a larger group of teams who'd be interested in these guys, Matt.
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because it sort of makes the list of suitors bigger because there's flexibility. You can even have a team that's on the bubble, and you get someone like a Connor Garland or a Brock Besser that has term left. He could help you now, and if you miss the playoffs, he can help you later. So I think those swing forwards are very interesting. There are also some of the more impactful names, I think, left on the list. I'm really looking closely at Connor Garland because, to me, he's someone who plays, I think, a lot bigger than his size. He gives you a lot of what Tyler Bertuzzi is going to give you without the vaccination concern. Because if you get Tyler Bertuzzi, what happens if you make the Stanley Cup final and you play the Calgary Flames or something like that? You have to sit Tyler Bertuzzi when you go on the road for a Game 7. Imagine that scenario. It's quite hypothetical, but it's still something in the back of your mind if you're sort of splitting hairs between the two. Connor Garland, to me, he has the scoring touch, and I think he has the snarl to his game. I think Frank put it on his trade targets board today that he brings you into the fight, and I absolutely agree. He's got that feistiness. It's a type of game that I think will translate better to the playoffs than the regular season. He's someone that you go to war for.
Yeah, and Ryan, I'll throw the same question your way. It's these young players, team control, guys who, if you're a GM, you're sitting there going, yeah, I could get them for this run, and I could get them for next year's run. Maybe the year after that. They're long-term pieces of this team, kind of. I don't want to call them necessarily core pieces, but guys you can kind of let your team grow with a little bit.
So there's that way of looking at it, but there's something else. Like, let's say you're a team that you're out of the playoff race because, look, you look at the Eastern Conference, that field seems pretty much set. So if you're one of these teams that are out of it, you're going to have the draft capital. You're most likely going to have the cap space. Like, what's stopping you from thinking, okay, why not enter into that conversation? Because so often we look at the trade deadline as if you're a contender, this is what you're trying to do. Or if you're a team on the fence, you're trying to get into the stage of being someone who could be a legitimate playoff team with the hopes that anything can happen. But also, if you look at the teams that are out of it, like, yes, we're talking about the future. And so often the future revolves around draft capital or getting prospects. But if you're a team that, again, had a good enough season, and I'm not saying that a team like this, but you look at a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets, especially when you look at where they are in the standing, I mean, they're above a 500 team. And it's clear like that's an organization that they're trending in a certain direction. What's stopping them? Granted, we haven't heard anything yet, but like what is stopping a team in that situation from saying, why not use a day like today to try to build for the future, use the rest of the season to see what you have, what it looks like, and then go into free agency and try to build around it in that scope. So again, it's another way of looking at how teams can use the deadline. Because of course, the talk is going to be about the contenders. But if you're that team that's out of it and you're looking at the future, you want to start having that conversation now.
Yeah, and if you remember back to the last deadline when we got that really surprising Mantha and Verana swap between Washington and Detroit, and I think when we look at some of these guys on the list, I think we could be in a place where in the next hour 37 here, we could be seeing some moves like that. So I'll put you guys on the spot here with one final question. If we're talking hockey trades, not quite a buyer, not a seller, but two teams who are both just trying to, maybe sort of help each other out, or like I joked about with Frank off the jump, if two teams don't like what they gave up, then two teams are probably pretty happy with the deal. But Matt, is there anyone out there who you look at as maybe a good candidate to make a solid hockey trade?
Are we talking team or are we talking player that's going to be in the trade? If we're talking player, if we're talking team, okay, I think the New Jersey Devils are a team to watch. We know, look at all the moves they made last summer, bringing in Jonathan Bernier, Thomas Tatar, Dougie Hamilton. We know they're sort of getting tired of this rebuild phase. They want to start sort of developing into a pseudo contender with Jack Hughes. His game's improving a lot. So to me, I think that's a team that could make some kind of sort of change of pace hockey trade. We know Jesper Bratt's name has been thrown out there. We know they've been linked to Brock Besser. That to me would be a pretty interesting fit. Someone who could be a trigger man, I think, to play with Jack Hughes perhaps. We know Brock Besser, he isn't going anywhere in terms of his goal scoring ability, but there's also a buy low opportunity. Weird stat for you. Brock Besser never has a 30-goal season in his career. He scored at a 30-goal pace, but it's strange to think he's never hit that milestone. He's had troubles with injuries. To me, that's a buying opportunity for someone who I still think has 40 goals in his stick. He's got one of the best releases in the game. I think the Devils, of course, you have Alexander Holtz on the way, but you can't guarantee he's going to be what you want. You don't know yet if he's going to blossom into that scorer. You bring in Besser, you have more of a shooter to join that core.
Ryan, who are you maybe looking at as a team who might even be kind of like New Jersey outside of the playoff picture, but could benefit from going out there and making a splash, making some sort of pure hockey deal?
You just talked about it a little bit ago, but it would be a team like the Detroit Red Wings, because you look at where they're at with this stage of their rebuild, and you know who the core pieces are. You know they're going to build through the draft. And not only that, but you have a general manager in Steve Yzerman, which based off of what he's done in Tampa, his administration showed you can find talent in any of the 7 rounds, or in some cases with Yanni Gourde, guys who went undrafted. So again, that's there. But if you're them, why wouldn't you want to look at trying to do the same thing you did last year, this year? Because again, when you look at the Red Wings and the gradual steps they've taken, it wasn't that long ago. This was a team that had the worst record and the lowest point total in salary cap in the salary cap era. And you look at where they are now, and they are becoming a more difficult team to play with. You can see where the overall vision is heading. You look at what they're trying to do, where they're trying to be, the way they develop young players, the fact that you're seeing young players like a Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider like really start to come into their own. They made the trade to get Nedeljkovic, which is a move that looks like it could work out for them in the long term. So if you're the Red Wings, why not try to add to that momentum by getting a piece now? So that way, when you look at next season, or better yet, when you go into free agency, you have now put yourself in a position to say, look, we have all these different pieces. We're in an environment that's geared towards winning. And not only that, but you've made yourself a really attractive situation, because a couple of years ago, our Max Boltman and I worked on this story about if you're the Red Wings, how do you get to the place of you're this comfortable rebuild? And we talked to different players, and there was one player, Nikita Zadorov, who said, here's the thing people underestimate about the Red Wings. You have a lot of American players with either ties to Michigan because they're from there, or they played at the NTDP, or it's just the fact that he's like, for him, he felt like Michigan and Detroit is one of those American hockey hubs that, like, when it's running well, guys want to play there. So you take that into account, a new building along with the direction. What makes you think the Red Wings can't be next?
Yeah, it's a fantastic point as well. One of those teams that you're just kind of, I think their fan base in general is waiting for that year where they just really take a big step forward. And obviously this season, there's a clear playoff divide in the Eastern Conference. We're going to quickly get to part 2 of our Scott Burnside interview series here. We're talking a ton about players on the go and who could be moving where, but what's it actually like to be a player on deadline day? Scott Burnside caught up with Colby Armstrong to talk about exactly that.
It was a trade deadline story that involved you, and it involved my former hometown team, the Atlanta Thrashers, and it did involve a future Hall of Famer. And you were right in that mix too, but Marian Hossa did sort of, he got a little ahead of you.
Yeah, he pulled away.
Yeah, but it was, and actually, you know, I jest, but it was a trade that I don't think it's overstating it. You know, was of critical importance to the Pittsburgh Penguins, you know, Pascal Dupuis going in that deal as well, a guy who became a sort of an iconic player in Pittsburgh. And of course, Marian Hossa goes to Pittsburgh, then he goes to Detroit, then he goes to Chicago, finally 3 times lucky there, Hall of Fame guy and a terrific guy as that. But can you walk us through what that was like? I mean, you were part of that young Penguin team that had really grown up really quickly. You know, after the 04-05 lockout, and of course, with Sidney Crosby there and Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang. Walk us through that trade deadline period, whether you felt it was coming and what it was like from your perspective.
And our minor league team, where I played in the American League, was really good for several years. And we had, you know, really good young group and skilled group of players. And we had guys there, if you remember the Yager trade as well from Pittsburgh. So we amassed some more prospects off of that trade as well. So not only were they doing poorly and collecting, you know, good prospects through the draft just because of that, and we know how that works. You know, the Yager trade also kind of boosted it to getting some more guys. So our team was really good and was kind of like peaking towards, you know, being young and being good, but we couldn't be there because the financial, you know, setup of the Penguins had us down in the minor. So once the lockout ended and Crosby came, then we got Malkin and, you know, Fleury developed, and you mentioned Letang, and we already had Whitney Orpik, myself, and on, Max Talbot, another guy that was, you know, big for the Penguins early. Once we kind of got into that, you know, kind of picture, Bernie, where it's like, okay, we're like, you know, we think we could do something here. And it just like happened like that. I remember, you know, obviously Hossa was a name that was coming up that trade deadline year. There was some things going around, and obviously he was like a big name guy that was at the deadline, and rightfully so with his career and what he was. And, you know, what was Don Waddell kind of looking to get for him, and what was he going to do with him, and where would he end up?
So, you know, so the rumors are out there, and the Penguins are looking to make a move, and the Thrashers are looking to, they can't afford Marian Hossa moving forward. So, like, do you think that you're like, are you worried? Are you starting to wonder, well, I wonder if this happens, could it be me?
In my mind, I was like, I'm young. I'm not like, I'm kind of like middle of the lineup type of, you know, third line winger in, you know, the minds, I think, on a good team, maybe even a fourth line winger, maybe on a really good team or a good team. So it's like, you know, where do you fit in? And I was like, I think I'm pretty safe. Like, you know, I'm Sid's friend. We're roommates on the road. Like he's like the man. Like they're not gonna rock his boat too much. Like, you know, I might be okay. Like I don't know. Like that's the, you know, the card in the deck, the trump card. You know, is like, you know, that's what I was thinking, right? Like that has anything to do with like the business of hockey at all.
Scott Burnside. If you want to catch that entire interview, Suitcase and the Scribe did a trade deadline special. The entire Jay Feaster interview, the entire Colby Armstrong interview is there. Let's get back to our friend Ryan S. Clark from The Athletic. Ryan, obviously covering the Seattle Kraken. We have the one move today with Marcus Johansson out the door. Carson Soucy is at number 16 on Frank Saravalli's trade bait board, and Jonas Donskoy is also on the list down at number 28. If you had to take your best guess, is Ron Francis done for the day, or do you think maybe Seattle could make one more move here?
If the Kraken make another move, it has to be one where they can't take on any salary, because right now they've already taken on 3 salaries between Calle Yarncrook, Mark Giordano, and Marcus Johansson. And so when you're in that kind of a situation and you look at Donskoy and you look at Soucy, they are both players with AAVs that Donskoy is at 3.9, Soucy's somewhere in the neighborhood of around 2.5, 2.6. And so, yes, they can be moved, but it's one of those things where if you're going to move for them, you're going to have to take on the full freight of what they're worth in order to facilitate a move. Otherwise, if you're the Kraken, it looks like maybe you're done again, unless you find a team that says, hey, we can take this on, and then you can do that without having to retain any more salaries.
One thing that's been talked about a little bit with the Seattle Kraken is just with the minor league team, the AHL team coming in next season, are they going to want to pick up some prospects? They're going to need bodies to play on that team. And a lot of talk has been made about the amount of draft picks now that they've been able to accumulate, especially in these next 2 seasons here. When you look at those picks, do you think there's a chance that maybe they start moving some picks for warm bodies that can play in the American League team? And how big of a focus is getting players who can fill out an entire system? How big of a focus is that going to be for the Kraken even moving into the summer?
So the thing is this, you've seen teams that have gone from these sort of joint operating agreements, Tyler, to having their own independent farm system. And the way it's usually worked is you will see teams go and sign AHL veterans because their thought is they want to take their prospects, the younger players, and put them around these veterans who can kind of teach and guide them and help them develop into something. And so an example of that was when the Colorado Avalanche, they broke away from their joint agreement with the St. Louis Blues. They put a team in Loveland, Colorado, which is 55 miles north. They brought in all these different sort of like between free agents, guys like David Warsofsky, Eric Condra, and the like. And they were able to help build and mentor these younger guys like a Logan O'Connor, who you are now seeing with the Avs. Again, another undrafted free agent. And so if you're the Kraken, like you can follow that approach, but then start using picks to put players there because right now, when you look at where their prospect situation is, like you're going to have Ty Karche play in the American Hockey League, who's now with the Sioux Greyhounds. Riker Evans, who was their second round pick. Everyone in that organization has been adamantly on record. Even Riker Evans' coaches have said, like, hey, look, if it wasn't for that situation, Riker Evans would be a guy in the AHL right now. It's just he has to stay in junior because the way the Kraken's operating agreement works with the Florida Panthers, they have between 8 and 12 roster spots, and right now they have around 11 roster spots that they're taking up, so there just simply isn't the room. So the Kraken can definitely fill out an AHL roster by signing free agents and, like, again, not being funny because I know we're a serious show, but, like, look, let's face it. You think guys are really going to be like, nah, I don't want to go to Palm Springs? Really? Like, come on. I mean, it's genuinely like one of those things where we had a Q&A with Todd Leiweke, the Kraken CEO, and it was just like, so what idea was it to go to Palm Springs? I'm sure that took some arm twisting. And he's like, well, in fairness, we did look at, maybe do we have a team in Seattle? Because we've seen plenty of teams have their AHL affiliate in the same market. Do you look at Spokane? Do you look at Boise? Do you look at Portland? But it was one of those things where they wanted to be respectful to the WHL or an ECHL setups that were already in those cities. So they looked around and said, hey, why not Palm Springs? Because for them, part of the strategy was 500,000 people live in Palm Springs. That number swelled to 800,000 in the winter months. And so if you're them, why not try to put something entertainment-wise down there in the form of that building? But then you have an AHL team. So that's when people dudes will find a way to make the sacrifice to go play in Palm Springs. And yes, then you can fill out your farm system through the draft.
And I know you're going to be working real hard to get a few trips down there, right? Lots of in-depth stories covering that American League team next year for Ryan S. Clark. Last question I got before we let you go. I can smell the food outside my door right now. The Nation Network team has Oodle Noodle. Fantastic. It's an Edmonton delicacy. What is Ryan Clark's deadline meal going to be today as he quickly eats during all the work?
Oh, God, nothing. Nothing at all. Just no, because like seriously, you don't ever want to be that person who like you're in the middle of a meal and it's like there's a trade. Just because again, it's that whole idea of you just always like want to be prepared. So yeah, there is no meal of choice. I wish I could give like a cool answer of like what do I eat? Pain, but I'm not Frank Saravalli. Which yeah, I'm gonna take this time to be like yeah, look at Frank and blow that guy up because seriously, he's been absolutely killer during the deadline. But in all seriousness, like yeah, nothing at all.
Ryan, I appreciate it. We'll call this a deadline rental and we will return you back to the Athletic, but we do appreciate you joining us. Good luck with the rest of deadline day. Keep killing it out in Seattle, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
There you go. That's Ryan S. Clark of The Athletic. And yes, I know Mike McKenna and Scott Burnside, they were getting antsy. They want to get back at it. But first, before we get back to our main panel, our friends at PointsBet have the Stanley Cup odds, and they're always updating over at their site, pointsbet.com or PointsBet Canada. And right now, the Stanley Cup favorites are still the Colorado Avalanche. You see them coming in at the top there at plus 350, and it's actually a pretty sizable gap before you get to second on that list, and the Florida Panthers, who have moved up into the solo second spot after the acquisitions of Claude Giroux and Ben Sherratt. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they've been busy this deadline, basically rebuilding their third line. It's plus 725. You got the Hurricanes at plus 900. So are the Calgary Flames. They've moved up about 2 or 3 spots here in the last few days. The Leafs have fallen off a little. They're now plus 1,200. Penguins, Wild, the Golden Knights, and New York Rangers all at 20-1 or better. And then you got the Bruins, Blues, Oilers, and Capitals as the 30 and under teams there. So it'll be interesting to see if any moves today that are still made in the final hour 22 before the deadline do anything to impact that. And let's get back to our main panel here of Scott Burnside and Mike McKenna here on the Daily Faceoff Trade Deadline Special. And guys, I just rattled off sort of those Stanley Cup odds and a few teams lower down, like the Minnesota Wild 18-1. We've talked a lot about the kind of work they did. The Vegas Golden Knights at 20-1. I want to go there with you, Mike McKenna. You're a guy who's very familiar with the Vegas Golden Knights organization. It's been a rough few weeks for that team. What can you see Vegas doing here in the next hour, 20 years? Is that a team who's just going to sit still and hope that what they have is good enough to get them into the big dance?
Well, sitting still has never been what the Golden Knights have done. They've always been active at the trade deadline. They've always been active whenever they can find what's presumed to be a better player available. They will go for that. We've never seen them subtract. And that's interesting because they do have Riley Smith. Okay, he's got a $5 million cap hit. He's a pending UFA. I'm sure he would have some value on the trade market. He's currently injured, but I would have to imagine he'll be back before the end of the season. So I don't know how to read this team because there's so many moving parts with all the players that they have currently either on IR or even on long-term IR at this point. Who knows what that team's going to look like in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? So I'm not sure what to expect, but I can't help but think that Vegas is going to try to make their team better here at the deadline because they're still in the playoff fight. They still have a chance at making it. Now, do they have a chance at the Stanley Cup? Do I think they're really a contender? No, I don't think so at all this year. I think there's just been too many injuries. They've struggled at times, even defensively. The goaltending, there's question marks there. If Robin Leonard's able to play, Brossoit hasn't carried the mail. Thompson looks okay. Like there's a lot going on there. So I'm hesitant to say that Vegas will remain pat. I think something will happen. I'd be surprised if they subtracted. But this is a team that's kind of at the precipice right now of peril. They're right at the edge of making the playoffs. And, they're in points percentage, they are trailing the Dallas Stars as we look at currently. So I think that they're going to make a play in some capacity. But Scott, I'm curious what you think. Do you think the Golden Knights are going to add, subtract? Do you think they may stand pat here at the deadline?
Yeah. Mike, for me, and I know you and I talked about it, I think last week on the Suitcase and the Scribe, but it's such a fascinating case because as you point out, I mean, they literally, they're slightly below the bubble in terms of point percentage. And you've got teams that are coming, Dallas has played a lot better in recent days. I don't see them trading John Klingberg at any point, even though he's on expiring contract and looks like his days in Dallas will run out at the end of this current season. Winnipeg has been, they're sort of straddling that line as well because of Vegas's poor play. But I can't help but think if Vegas finds a way to stay in the top 8, what about a Colorado-Vegas first-round matchup? We saw it in the second round last year. And if they can get healthy, right? I mean, if we are going to see Mark Stone and Alec Martinez go down the long, long list, if they can get healthy, that's not a real bonus for the Colorado Avalanche to play in the first round as the top seed and presumptive President's Trophy winner. I want to ask you about Logan Thompson, though, because the goaltending is such a key issue for this Golden Knights team right now. As you point out, Robin Leonard not expected back in the regular season. Who knows what his durability or status would be come playoff time. Logan Thompson is he a kid? Or he's not a kid necessarily, but can he seize the moment and become the everyday starter down the stretch and maybe carry them into a playoff spot? Or is it too uncertain there? Is it too fluid in goal and that they might actually do the unthinkable and miss the playoffs altogether?
I think all that's on the table. I think the Golden Knights could trade for a goaltender here in the next couple hours. I could easily see that happening. The reason being, like Logan Thompson, I think is seen as a goaltender that will be a Golden Knight full time in the future. His contract says so. His next contract that kicks in next year, it's a 3-year deal. The first year is a two-way, and the following 2 years are one-way. So clearly, there's a plan that he's going to be a Golden Knight, or that's the hope. Laurent Brossoit has 1 year left on his contract. Now, the Golden Knights could move that out this summer. They could even move that out now. That could happen. I'd be surprised by it given the depth that they need. Thompson, to me, makes the game difficult at times. He's incredibly gifted, but he's all arms and legs. And he ends up on his back, on his chest a lot. There's not as much control to his game as you want to see. And those type of goaltenders, Scott, to me, it can be really hot and cold. When they're on their game, when they're tracking the puck well, they can play. But then once things go the wrong direction, you lose your structure, it can look bad real fast. He's going to have to iron that out to be successful in the NHL, and he's learning on the fly. And keep in mind, he's only played 50 American League games. Like, this isn't like Logan Thompson's known how to carry the mail at the American League level for more than a season or half a season. He hasn't. And I'm not dragging him down. This is just reality from what I've experienced. I think it's asking a lot. Could he do it? We'll see. I really like his skill set. I love his attitude. He works hard, all those things. But it's a lot on his plate. So I think the biggest thing, Scott, you touched on, what if Vegas actually does make it in? And they're actually kind of healthy.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, as crazy as this season's been, they might catch lightning in the bottle if they get everybody back in time. I will say that. If they could somehow make the playoffs with this piecemeal team that they currently have, there's reason to actually say watch out for these guys because it's such a wild card, even against Colorado, because they waxed them in 6 games last year. And I know Colorado's better this year, but that's a lingering effect. So we'll see, won't we? I think they make a move, though, before today's over.
Yeah, it's I would imagine that they would. I mean, of the goalies still on the trade targets list here that you've seen floating at the bottom of your screen, Alexander Georgiev is the highest one still available at number 11, 25 years old, pending RFA, $2.425 million AAV. You keep going down that list. Like, I would have thought that maybe a guy like Anton Forsberg might have made sense there just because, again, it's low cap hit. You would have thought that the acquisition cost was low, but Ottawa makes the move to actually re-sign him. 3 years, $2.75 million per. Is one of 2 goalie signings today, actually, as well, with Karel Vejmelka getting an extension out in the desert. He's staying put with the Arizona Coyotes. Just keep working down this list here to some other goalies that could potentially be available. You know, Mackenzie Blackwood's on our list at number 32 from the New Jersey Devils. I don't really see that as being much of a fit. He's more of a guy I could see as a long-term guy for an organization, and that's certainly not what it would appear Vegas is looking at right now. Jonas Korpisalo, age 27. I wouldn't be convinced that that he's much of an upgrade for the Vegas Golden Knights right now. So you look at that list, Mike. Jaro Halak is a guy out in Vancouver, 36 years old, pending UFA. Maybe he could be that stopgap piece, but is there a good fit on the trade market for the Golden Knights in terms of their goaltending?
Right now, if they were trying to stop the bleeding in terms of in goal, and I wouldn't say bleeding, it's just been not good enough. It's not like it's been terrible, but it hasn't been what the Golden Knights needed to get through the injuries. They didn't have a goalie that could carry them. I'm not sure what's available that I like. Georgiev is the best one available on that list. Actually had the game of his maybe life, I guess, last night. 44 saves, shutout. Like, Georgiev has really only been strong to me when he plays a lot. When he doesn't play much, his numbers haven't been good. He hadn't won a game since January 8th until just last evening. So he'd struggled, and his body language has been terrible. I'm not sure there's warm feelings about Georgiev around the league in some ways, but if you need a stopgap goaltender, you could get that for Vegas. Korpisalo, he's been terrible this year, and it wasn't good last year. And everybody remembers his play in the bubble. It was fantastic, but there's big structural problems with his game. I don't know what team takes on a reclamation project and hopes that that's going to improve them. So there are a couple goalies left, but I thought Forsberg held the key. Fleury's off the list, and great deal for Forsberg. I mean, he finally gets some stability. I thought he'd get a 2-year deal at $3 million or a 3-year deal at 2.5. He gets a 3-year deal at 2.75. So maybe I'm starting to figure out this contract game. But I think it's a good play. The question is, Scott, like, what do you think the Senators are going to do with $10 million a goal next year? That's going to eat up like a fourth of their actual cap when you figure in real contracts.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly hop in here just because it's been, we almost went a full hour without a deal here on deadline day, but we do have a minor trade to report. The Ottawa Senators communications sending this one out. The Senators are getting Zach Senyshyn from the Boston Bruins along with a 2022 fifth-round pick. Going the other way back to Boston, it's defenseman Josh Braun and a 2022 conditional 7th-round pick. So again, that's Zach Senyshyn going to the Ottawa Senators along with a 5th in 2022. Boston receives Josh Braun and a 2022 conditional 7th rounder. Just another piece of news that we've gotten here from the man Bobby Margarita on Twitter, TSN's Bob McKenzie, saying that William Lagesson has been dealt to the Montreal Canadiens from the Edmonton Oilers. McKenzie adding the presumption is Lagesson is part of the deal that will see Brett Kulak go from Edmonton to Montreal. So we still haven't had that one official yet, the Kulak to Edmonton deal, but William Lagesson is a part of the return going back to the Montreal Canadiens. So a couple of minor notes here to pass your way as things have slowed down just a little bit here on deadline day, where it is an hour 12, as you can see in the timer there at the top of your screen. But I'm looking at the other end of the screen here. Sorry, I always point the wrong way. Frank Saravalli's working hard. He is working that phone right now. So we will see if we get anything soon in terms of player movement. Going back to Mike and Scott here quickly. I interrupted a thought there quickly, so I'll let you guys quickly finish up here.
Yeah, Scott, I'll come back to you on this real quick. I mean, do you see Pierre Dorion carrying $10 million in goaltenders? He's got Matt Murray at 6.25, or sorry, not 6.2. He's got Matt Murray's just under that, and then you've got Forsberg at 2.75, and Philip Gustafsson is just under $1 million next year on a one-way contract. Is this feasible for them?
He can't be put on waivers anymore. He's no longer waiver exempt.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it does create some issues, although I think, to me, the Forsberg move is, it helps to guard against, what is Matt Murray's status going to be? I mean, it's been a lamentable time in Ottawa for the two-time Stanley Cup champion. What's his health going to be like? Where can he get his game level back to? It's not sustainable, especially if you're a team like Ottawa. I feel about this team that some nights I think that they should be ready to jump into a playoff discussion or at least play meaningful games, into the second half of next season. But you can't do that. You can't evolve unless you have the goaltending that allows a young team to make mistakes. So you need a goaltending tandem, frankly, that is going to allow this young team to grow and maybe take another step or two forward. I think that's, Ottawa is in a similar spot as Buffalo or Detroit, and certainly Seattle didn't have the goaltending that they needed to in their formative early weeks and months of this expansion season for them. Can Matt Murray and Forsberg coexist? Can you both stay healthy and provide quality starts? Mike, to me, that's the only way it works, is if both are healthy, both are providing quality starts, and it becomes a real tandem moving forward. But if Matt Murray's going to be in and out of the lineup, I don't know what the answer is with that contract, but certainly he has taken a back seat and has taken a real step back in terms of this organizational depth. We'll see what happens in the offseason to him and what he comes back with in terms of his health. What do you think? Like, how do you have an answer for that? Because it's not really a workable thing moving forward, unless both are healthy and both are playing at a high level.
Yeah, I just expected Forsberg to move on, frankly. I thought that the Senators would pick up the goalie off the scrap heap to back up Murray, but maybe it says that, hey, we don't know if Murray's going to be healthy, which is a real concern for that team. I think it's a smart play. It just surprises me for that team to commit $10 million to goaltending. Just to touch on quickly that trade that we just broke there between Braun and Shenchen. Shenshin's a former first-round pick who's struggled at the NHL level, but he's really picked up his game this year in Providence of the American League. So I think there's some hope for the Senators that they're now getting a player in Zach Senshin who can potentially speed up their defense, maybe uncover a diamond in the rough here. First round, 15th overall in 2015 he went. Just hasn't been able to find his footing with the Boston Bruins. And then going the other direction there, Josh Brown is someone who, in my eyes, he's a big shutdown defenseman. He's brought in by DJ Smith from a former connection in the OHL with the Sioux Greyhounds. And Brownie's he's a big shutdown guy, but he's not a big puck mover. So I'd be surprised if he ends up with Boston. I think we're just picking a couple of players or swapping them out, getting some fresh starts there. But Senyshyn is definitely somebody who at one point was looked at with quite a bit of offensive potential. Maybe Ottawa can untap that.
Our friends at Puckpedia, after this deal, the Boston Bruins have $643,000 in projected cap space, which they can fit $3.2 million of an annual cap hit today. Could add more by demoting players. We'll see if the Bruins have anything else up their sleeves. Let's go here. We've been doing our countdown all day. We are now on number 3, Matt Larkin's best and worst trade deadline deals.
At number 3 on the worst trades list, it's the Minnesota Wild trade that they would probably like to have back. 2017, they get Martin Hanzal from the Arizona Coyotes. They give up a package that includes a first-round pick, some other futures, and it really just flops. It's not that Hanzal plays terribly. He sort of delivers what he's supposed to, two-way play and face-off ability, but the Wild get bounced from the playoffs so quickly it ends up being a wasted trade. And really, if you talk to a Wild fan, they will tell you it set back the franchise. They didn't really have a deep prospect pool. They weren't able to maneuver much in free agency, so they lost some crucial building blocks for a player that really only helped them for one playoff series. At number 3 on the best trades list, we have the 2009 deal in which the Pittsburgh Penguins get Chris Kunitz and Eric Tangradi from the Anaheim Ducks for Ryan Whitney. If you're a Marvel fan out there, it reminds me of the meme with Thanos. What did it cost? Everything. Because Ray Shero gives up Ryan Whitney, a franchise defenseman in the making, because he knows he needs that winning piece on the left wing. And Kunitz, who had played on a Stanley Cup winning team in Anaheim in 2007, he comes in, he helps the Penguins win the Cup in 2009, he helps them win Cups in 2016 and 2017 as well, becomes one of their most important players in franchise history in the tier below the superstars. Turns out to be a great trade and one that has ripples for years to come for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
That Chris Kunitz deal, I mean, if that doesn't happen on deadline day, Chris Kunitz probably never remember. The Penguins never an Olympian either. Let's go back to the start of the day here and give you a quick little recap on what we've seen so far. It started earlier this morning with Nathan Beaulieu going to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a 7th-round pick, and then the Jets active once again. They acquired a 4th-rounder, but they did offload the contract of Brian Little in that deal to the Arizona Coyotes, along with prospect Nathan Smith. Marcus Johansson goes back home to the Washington Capitals. Daniel Sprong, a 2022 4th and a 2023 6th, going to the Seattle Kraken. The major deal at 11:07 a.m. Eastern. It was a 2022 conditional 2nd-rounder going to the Chicago Blackhawks. Marc-Andre Fleury going to the Minnesota Wild. The Wild then promptly shipping off Kaapo Kähkönen and a 2022 5th to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for defenseman Jacob Middleton. Alex Biega to Nashville, future considerations to Toronto. Justin Braun to the Rangers. The Flyers get a 2023 3rd-rounder in that deal. And then there was the Brett Kulak trade. And with that, we will go to Frank Saravalli. Frank, you have the return on this deal. Is it indeed a 2nd and William Lagesson?
Round pick and William Lagesson. Lagesson going to the Montreal Canadiens in order to make the cap hits work and the math work. One key note on William Lagesson as well, he'll need to play a number of games in order to avoid hitting Group 6 UFA status. We wrote a story last week on dailyfaceoff.com about the potential Group 6 unrestricted free agents that could happen. He was on that list for the Edmonton Oilers, and he's the guy that they offload in this deal in order to make the cap work. Brett Kulak for a second-round pick and William Lagesson.
So we got that deal finalized. We also got that minor deal between the Senators and the Bruins as well. Frank, but what's your general sense of the way things are sitting here with an hour and 3 minutes to go until the deadline? Do you think things will really heat up, or could we maybe be sitting here and could things stay quiet? Oh, we may have lost Frank here.
Sorry, I actually have something here. Sorry.
Okay.
You got to come back to me in a bit. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to Frank Saravalli in just a minute here. In the meantime, I think I do see our good friend Pete Blackburn is back here. So let's go to let's bring Pete back on here. Obviously, out in Boston, the Bruins making a small trade here, but I know Zach Senyshyn is a guy that fan base has talked about a lot. Pete, what's your sort of instant reaction here to the minor swap between the Bruins and Senators?
I think it's a little more exciting for the Senators. I think Zach Senyshyn deserves another shot, and he gets to go home to Ottawa. And if he can sort of revitalize his career or kickstart it a little bit there, might be a nice little piece for them. From the Bruins standpoint, doesn't move the needle all that much. And obviously they were looking for depth on the back end, and they get it in Josh Braun. But it's not all that exciting. I do wonder though if this could possibly be a precursor to another deal, because they're carrying 8 defensemen, and obviously on the right side, it's been pretty thin available on the market right now. Mm-hmm. So I do wonder if they do ship out like a guy like Connor Clifton and package him possibly in a trade with Jake DeBrusk to bring in somebody else. I just did see that Rickard Rakell is possibly in the mix for the Bruins. So I wonder if this is a precursor.
Pete, we're going to have to get your instant reaction to another deal in just a second because Frank Saravalli has a piece of breaking news for us. Frank, what do you got?
Sounds like the St. Louis Blues are acquiring defenseman Nick Leddy from the Detroit Red Wings, working on details. Lots happening here at the moment, but the ask, again, we're waiting on the return, but the ask was a second-round pick previously from the Red Wings, so there would need to be some cap considerations here. Leddy has a $5 million salary, if I'm not mistaken, or $5.5 million, and the St. Louis Blues are dollars in and dollars out. So lots to come here, but Nick Leddy going from Detroit to St. Louis.
There you go. Nick Leddy on the move. The St. Louis Blues finally getting involved here on deadline day. We'll see what happens there. Nick Leddy, number 3 on our trade targets list. 30-year-old defenseman from the Detroit Red Wings, $5.5 million AAV. Like Frank said, Leddy, the highest defenseman left on our list. The other D-man after Leddy, Justin Braun, was number 7. He's been moved already. So let's get to some instant reaction here. Pete Blackburn, the Blues, adding some depth on their blue line. We kind of heard that a big priority for them at this deadline was getting someone who could play with Colton Parayko. They've had a ton of different people kind of going in and out of that spot. Mikkola for a little, Scandella for a little. No doubt, in my opinion at least, that Nick Leddy is a clear-cut upgrade.
Yeah, I wonder. I expected them to pursue an upgrade on the blue line. I don't know if I buy Nick Leddy as a guy who has enough of an impact at this point in his career as the Blues need. I mean, we know that the Blues need a big-time upgrade on defense. They're probably the most clear-cut shoppers for guys on defense, and they've been linked to pretty much every name that's been out there on the blue line. So seeing that Nick Leddy is maybe the guy that if he is the guy that they're settling for here, I don't know if it's enough of an upgrade for the Blues to get them to where they want to go.
Be interesting to see, if St. Louis does have anything else up their sleeve here. You wonder if maybe they'll look to add potentially another forward. It just maybe, you're right. Like, Leddy isn't maybe a slam dunk upgrade, but was there anyone else out there for him, right? Like, did they maybe just miss the boat? Should they maybe have pushed harder for a guy like Lindholm?
And you also look at the prices that have been going for defensemen so far, and the prices have been pretty high. So if the Blues weren't willing to adjust to the market as it is right now, then maybe Nick Leddy is a guy that was further down their list and ended up not being so expensive and was a price that they were willing to pay. But again, I don't know if it's as much of an instant upgrade as St. Louis fans were hoping for here at the deadline.
Frank Saravalli quickly tweeting out Oscar Sundqvist and Jake Wallman are part of the deal going back the other way. Frank, as you can see, still working the phone there up top. Pete, we'll see if we get any other deals right away here. The most encouraging thing Frank Saravalli said was that, quote, there is a lot happening. And as a guy who's been sitting here for an hour with no deals to talk about, I'm very encouraged by that. Pete, I imagine we're talking to you right away here, but let's move on and bring in our friend Chris Gear for Gear's grades. Before we get to your grade on this Nick Leddy deal, Chris Gear, under an hour to go in deadline day, what would the inside of an NHL war room be like in this moment with very little time left on the clock? Is it kind of all hands on deck, everyone dialed in?
I would say right now sphincters are getting tighter than when Mike McKenna has to face off and had Connor McDavid driving down against him. It's a tense moment, right? You may have a bunch of different things in play and you're just waiting for the other side to come back. If a team's in on your guy, they might be looking at 3 or 4 other teams with comparable guys. You see the guys that, Kulak, Braun, and now Leddy. Those are probably guys that, are in the same range. So a lot of different teams that were looking to upgrade their D would be looking at all of those guys. And they maybe calling one GM, trying to get a price. Then they call the next GM and then the next. So if you're on the receiving end of that, you're waiting and you're anticipating and hoping that the call comes back to you and they take your offer. So it can be tense. I wouldn't say it's all hands on deck. It's I mentioned in an article, usually you've got sort of 2 subsets. You've got a big war room with your analytics team and your pro scouts and a lot of your advisors. And then usually the GM with, 1 or 2 people is having those calls. It just gets too big and cumbersome to have everybody together. And then you've got some of the guys in the war room making some other calls, trying to feed information into the GM. But yeah, it's gut check time, and put your best offer up now, because with 1 hour left, there's not much time to get something done. So hopefully people are taking that approach and making stuff happen.
I was going to ask you that. How often in the last hour do offers actually get better? At this point, are the best offers generally out there and teams are just kind of picking and choosing from those?
Yeah, probably the latter, where the offers are out there and people are choosing the one they like the best. But sometimes, it comes down to the very end, and somebody might throw something in at the last minute just to make it work. If there's been a bit of a standstill and it's not budging, somebody might, throw in a late round pick or a B prospect or something. Everybody wants to come out of this looking like they've won the deal. And so sometimes it's just that little bit of grease or that little juice that helps you, at least in perception, make it look like you've put one over on the other team. So there's a bit of that going on right now, I'm sure.
Chris, we're going to have to get to your grade on the on the Nick Leddy deal in just a second here, because I think we got another trade coming down the chute here. Let's bring in our insider, Frank Saravalli. Frank, what do you got?
The Colorado Avalanche guys to make another move after acquiring Josh Manson on their back end. And I'm told that the Colorado Avalanche have acquired Arturi Lehkonen from the Montreal Canadiens. I mentioned a while back that the Canadiens were working on a trade in addition to sending Kulak to Edmonton, and it's Lehkonen to Colorado. I'm told that they are getting a top prospect and a draft pick in return. I believe that I believe that prospect is Justin Barron. That is unconfirmed. He is a recent first-round pick by the Colorado Avalanche. So intriguing if that's the route that this ends up going. Lehkonen, just to hear the teams that have raved about Lehkonen over the last little while here, his commitment to defense, his Selke-style fervor that he plays defense, and now the offensive output that's come with his game since the coaching change with Marty St. Louis. I was really curious to see if Lehkonen would move. There was tons of interest in him, and it would make sense that a top prospect of Justin Barron's equivalency would end up being in the mix. Again, not confirmed. I believe the Colorado Avalanche were in the process of informing their pieces that were involved in the pick, but huge pickup for the Colorado Avalanche, the top team in the West, getting better with Artturi Lehkonen now on board.
They get Manson, and now they have Lehkonen as well. Lehkonen was number 26 on our trade day board, pending RFA, $2.3 million AAV. Thank you very much, Frank. I'm sure that is not the last time we will be going to here in the final 53 minutes of the trade deadline. Just quickly, before we keep this train rolling and get some instant analysis from Pete Blackburn on this one, waiver news for the day. I know everyone was very excited for the waiver news, but this one is kind of hilarious. Arizona claims Hari Sateri off waivers from Toronto, so they sign him, and now they don't get him because he's on his way to the desert. The Seattle Kraken claimed Derek Pouliot. Vancouver claimed Brad Richardson from the Calgary Flames. And one of note, Peter Mrazek did clear waivers for Toronto. Not exactly the most surprising thing. Let's get to Pete Blackburn now. Artturi Lehkonen is going to Colorado. We've been talking about what they would do to kind of go toe-to-toe. You see these other big Stanley Cup contenders loading up, Pete. What do you think of the Avs getting Lehkonen?
It reminds me of that a deal is struck. It's probably a good deal for both sides, and that's how I feel here because the Colorado Avalanche just got richer with Lehkonen. I mean, unbelievable ad. I think he's going to fit perfectly into their middle six, and he is somebody who comes in with an ability to kind of give them a little extra oomph and make them scarier for a playoff run in which we have very, very high expectations. But it costs you a lot. It costs you a top prospect, Justin Barron, if that's who ends up going, and then a high draft pick. It's a tough it's a tough thing. But we've seen it in the past where a first round pick for a guy like Barclay Goodrow, you're like, okay, that kind of is an imbalance, or it's a lot to give up. But you can see the impact that a guy like that has in the middle of a lineup, and how much better and more dangerous it makes you during a playoff run. So, I think Lehkonen is an awesome ad for Colorado. Maybe not the big type of splash that you could equate to a guy like Claude Giroux, but a real difference maker when it comes to depth.
Let's keep moving along here. Justin Barron, a top prospect included in that deal. Lucky for us, we have our prospect analyst, Chris Peters, available to join us with the next wave here. Chris, Justin Barron, defenseman, going to Montreal. For the Habs fans watching, what are they getting in Barron?
Well, he's a real interesting prospect. I think he's a good two-way defenseman, good size, right shot, and a guy that moves the puck well. He's played most of the season in the AHL, so he's, getting closer and closer to pro ready. He's played at the World Juniors. He's been a guy that has been, a top player pretty much wherever he's been. So the fact that he was able to transition so easily to the AHL is very encouraging. It's something that I think that the Habs will see, okay, well, this guy isn't that far away. And it's a guy with some size and some physicality as well. So, I've always liked Justin Barron just because he keeps the game pretty simple. He does have good puck moving ability. That first pass is certainly one of his real assets, and he can move around the offensive zone pretty well. Is he going to be your power play guy? Probably not. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to play on the power play. But if for tournament, I think he's a BB plus prospect, which is, everyday NHLer, a guy that's going to help your team. And, he's might not be the biggest impact player, but he's going to be a guy that gives you pretty good quality minutes. I think his ceiling is a top 4 defenseman. If everything kind of goes right for him. And even if you end up with a 5, I think he could be a solid 5 on the right side. So a lot of really good things there. I mean, if you're going to lose a player like Artturi Lehkonen, you got to make sure that you're going to get something of value back. And I think the Habs absolutely did that here with Justin Barron, a player that I personally like quite a bit, and a guy that I think that they're going to like in their system just because he's very steady, he's very reliable, he's predictable in the right kind of ways. And he still has that skill level that can give you a little bit of extra offense as well. So I think this is a very good pickup for Montreal.
Fantastic stuff, Chris. Love the insight there. I think we will have some time here. I can see there might be some other deals coming down. I believe we have time to get to Gears grades, though. As always, this is brought to you by 3Ice, the new professional 3-on-3 hockey league. Head to 3ice.com, hit the tickets tab for more. 6 different U.S. cities, 2 stops in Canada as well. 3ice.com. All right, Chris here. Let's go back to the Leddy deal because we have that one in full now. It's Jake Wallman, Oscar Sundqvist, and a 2023 second rounder going to Detroit. Nick Leddy and Luke Witkowski going to the St. Louis Blues. What do you grade this one?
Yeah, I think Leddy's a decent pickup for St. Louis, but it's a little bit like the other deals we saw with Braun and with Kulak, where it doesn't really move the needle for the Blues. I'm a bit with Pete Blackburn on this one. It's fine, but Leddy adds experience and he'll be a good depth piece, but not sure that this really moves the needle as much as St. Louis might have wanted to. I know they were in on trying to Hampus Lindholm and Ben Sherratt and even Chychrun and others. So I'm going to go with a B- on that one. And then if you want to grade.
Yeah, let's go to the Lehkonen deal here if you want. I'm just reading now 50% of the salary being retained in that deal, but it's Justin Barron and a second for Arturi Lehkonen. Both sides of that deal, what are you giving the grades?
Yeah, so Lehkonen's a guy I saw a lot when we were in the All-Canadian division when I was with Vancouver, and so we played them 9 or 10 times during the year, with no fans in the building, so you're laser focused on what's happening on the ice. And, he's just a guy that has great details, kind of a pest to play against. Reminds me a little bit of, Brandon Hagel starting to develop that offensive threat to his game, but really solid defensively and good forechecker. So I think, Colorado, this is a really excellent pickup for them. After getting Manson earlier this week and then adding a player like this, I think it really rounds out what they bring to the table. They've obviously got a high-powered offense. They've got a good-looking D-core now, and this kind of rounds out their third line, I think, and gives them some versatility. So I'm going to go with an A for the Avalanche. And, for Montreal, they've got I'm not sure what's going on with Shea Weber, whether he's coming back. Jeff Petry's obviously getting a little bit older, and he's been involved in trade rumors. So, they needed to bolster the blue line. And I think getting a prospect like Justin Barron together with a pick, I think that's a really solid move for them. I don't know if Barron is, going to be a first or second pairing D. So that maybe downgrades it just a little bit, but I still think this was a solid move for them to make. I'm going to go with an A- for Montreal.
There you go. A couple of A grades given out from our friend Chris Gear, presented by 3ice.com. Head to the link, hit the tickets tab for more info. 6 different U.S. cities. I think it's 2 stops in Vegas as well and 2 different stops in Canada. Chris, we will no doubt be checking in with you a few more times throughout the show. 46 minutes to go until deadline day. I think we're going to take another look in a second here at our trades target list with our friend Matt Larkin. But before we do that, let's get to our countdown as well. We need to squeeze in one more of these. We are on number 2 for our best and worst trade deadline deals of the salary cap era.
At number 2 on the worst trades list, we have the blockbuster from 2014 in which the St. Louis Blues went all in, acquired star goaltender Ryan Miller from the Buffalo Sabres for a big package that included a first-round pick, Chris Stewart, some other pieces, and it flopped. Miller was so-so in the balance of the regular season. In the playoffs, the Blues got off to a hot start against the Chicago Blackhawks in round 1. They ended up dropping 4 straight. They bomb out of the playoffs in round 1. Miller's save percentage goes below 900. So big package surrendered. Miller just never gets into a rhythm with his new team. And you don't have to follow my word for it. You can look at our website, interview with Scotty Burnside, Ryan Miller, details why that trade went wrong. At number 2 on the best trades list, I'm going to cheat and name 2 trades because they're just so linked. Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow, 2020. Those 2 guys, they were line mates for 2 years, part of 2 Cup championship teams in Tampa. I have to talk about them together. They were acquired just days apart. Julien Brisebois knows the sacrifice he has to make. The year before, Tampa wins 62 games, gets swept in the first round. Anything less than a Cup final appearance, I think, is unacceptable in 2020. So what does Brisebois do? He trades first-round picks to get 2 guys that are sort of role players, or at least middle 6 forwards, but they help the penalty kill. They help Tampa learn how to win ugly, not just pretty. And we saw 2 straight Cup runs. Coleman and Goodrow, crucial members of that team, formed a dynamite third line with Yanni Gourde. No regrets on those trades, absolutely, even if it seemed like a high cost at the time for Julien Brisebois.
it's funny, we've talked so much over the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks leading up to the deadline about those Coleman and Goudreau trades and everything that went into those. And when they announced the Nick Paul deal, Tampa Bay in their Photoshop actually used Blake Coleman's body in the Photoshop for the Nick Paul deal. And Coleman was on Twitter a couple of minutes ago having some fun with that. As we wait for our friend Matt Larkin to join us, let's go back to our main panel here with Scott Burnside and Mike McKenna and chat a little bit about what we've seen here. Arturi Lehkonen, 50% retained for Justin Barron and a second-round pick. Nick Leddy and Luke Witkowski going to the Blues in exchange for Jake Wallman, Oscar Sundqvist, and a 2023 second-rounder in that deal. Scott, I'll start with you. Which one of these two deals stands out to you as maybe being a real big improvement for the contenders involved?
Yeah, and well, I think we talked about a little bit earlier, wondering and waiting what Colorado was going to do if there was another shoe to drop after Josh Manson. And Lehkonen just fits what this team needs, I think, in terms of, and again, we talked about finding players that can go at various places in your lineup, sliding up and down, the ability to kill penalties. He has some playoff experience. To me, this is just a tremendous fit. Jared Bednar has all kinds of options now up front. And I just think this is a terrific deal for the Colorado Avalanche. I just think it's also worth noting, and I know that Chris Peters mentioned this too. I think Montreal's done an interesting job. You know, it's a brand new hockey ops group there. Kent Hughes is a GM. Of course, Jeff Gordon running things as the head of hockey ops. A lot of new faces in Montreal, a lot of movement over the last 2 or 3 weeks, you know, starting with the Tyler Toffoli deal. I think the Habs have done a nice job in terms of changing the page there, changing direction. So I think a tip of the cap to what the Habs have been able to accomplish thus far. But man, Colorado, you know, they entered the day as the odds-on favorite to win it all. They've done nothing but solidify their place as, I think, by far right now the best team in the NHL.
Oh, do we have? Oh, Mike, you're muted again.
This is what happens when you're trying to make sure you get all the late-breaking things up on your computer screen. So what the Avalanche have done very well here is utilize not just their draft picks, but also their prospect pipeline. They've done a good job of drafting and developing from within. Colorado Eagles, just down the road in the American Hockey League, they have players there that have value. And you have a team like the Avalanche that's actually still pretty young for a contender. When you look at their core pieces, so many of them are under 27, 28 years old. It lets you make these moves. So I said it earlier, bringing somebody into Colorado, I'd be leery of that. That would have been for a big time play. Now Lehkonen's is still a large play, but like I could see him easily fitting second, probably third line, but even the second line, he could play right side with Kadri and Burakovsky pretty easily. He does a lot of things so well that this is a seamless transition into the lineup. So I think Lehkonen fits very well. I like that Colorado utilized the pieces within the minors to do up. You're giving up a first-round pick, but it's a defenseman. It's somebody who can move a puck. Well, they have a few defensemen that can do that already in Colorado. So, again, affordability to do so. Flipping over to St. Louis. Now, this one is interesting because to me, I think St. Louis struck out on just about every big defenseman that was available on the left side, on the back end for a left-shooting defenseman to potentially go with Colton Parayko. But I still like Nick Leddy a lot. And it's not just because of his Stanley Cup that he won previously with the Chicago Blackhawks. It's just that this is somebody you know what you're getting. Okay, Nico Mikkola, high ceiling, good player, but his game has had ebbs and flows this year. If you're going to really go into the Stanley Cup playoffs, do you want that player in your top pair? I think there's question marks with that, and Leddy just shores it up for you. Oscar Sundqvist, massively popular in that locker room. That's going to be tough for the team to take, but I think that the Blues knew that he could potentially be on the block. And then Wallman is someone for me that I think actually has a lot of space to grow as an NHL player. I think Steve Yzerman would look at Wallman as someone who has a chance to still be a pretty good player in the league. He just hasn't been able to grab onto it. He does a lot of exciting things with the puck. He's a great skater. But the Blues also have Scott Perunovich, Hobie Baker, winner previously. It's in their pipeline as a defenseman who I think is probably taking that role for the future.
We may have another deal coming down right now as we are 39 minutes away from the trade deadline. Something important to keep in mind here is that, remember that Mantha Vrana deal, I've referenced it a few times, but that one didn't come down until 3:28 Eastern, so almost 28 minutes after the deadline. Obviously a backlog of trades at Central Registry. I do see Matt Larkin is here, but just quickly, Frank Saravalli reporting that Andrew Cogliano confirming he's on his way to the Colorado Avalanche. So just pulling up the return on that deal here. It's going to be a 2024 fifth-round pick. Cogliano goes from San Jose to Colorado for a 2024 fifth-rounder. Bob McKenzie was on that one first. Another deal that I'm just seeing pop up now is the Washington Capitals acquiring centerman Johan Larsson from the Arizona Coyotes. It's a 2023 third-round pick in that deal. Arizona keeping 50% of Johan Larsson's salary. There's been a lot on the go, so let's bring in Matt Larkin to take a peek at our trade targets list. It's brought to you by Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. It's got the precision of number 97 when it comes to trimming below the waist. Check out the Ultra Premium collection as well. It's on their site, manscaped.com. Use that promo code DFO. Deadline gets you 20% off and free shipping. Shout out to Manscaped for being a part of our trade deadline coverage. Matt Larkin, the last name remaining in the top 3 on our list is Andrew Kopp of the Winnipeg Jets, 27-year-old forward, pending UFA, $3.64 million. The Jets on the outside of the playoff picture. I can imagine they would want to get something for Andrew Kopp here. Do you see a natural fit still out there? Because I would imagine Colorado's also out of this now, and they were a team that was talked about as potentially having interest in them.
Yeah, especially giving up Justin Barron. It looks like Colorado pushed its eggs to the Arturi Lehkonen basket. But I do know there are teams that are looking to add forwards. We've heard the rumor mill. I still think the Pittsburgh Penguins, I said earlier on the show, they're a team that desperately needs more help on the wings. I could see Kopp being fit there because he has the versatility to sort of play anywhere in the lineup. I still think the New York Rangers are a team to watch. They have that flexibility in cap space as well. They made a couple smaller moves for sure, Frank Vetrano, guys like that, but I still think Justin Braun is well on defense, but I could see them making a splashier move. In terms of teams that have a higher ceiling, we know Igor Shesterkin is having this otherworldly season. I think the Metro is still fairly wide open, especially with Carolina being so quiet today. If I'm the New York Rangers, I got to step up. Chris Drury, make a big move. You can catch Carolina in terms of cup contender status if you add an impact name at forward.
Well, the other side of the Rangers thing is, I mean, you have a guy who's going to be a Hart Trophy or potentially going to be a Hart Trophy finalist between the pipes. The most important position, you're absolutely set. I think Chris Drury should be doing everything he can to give this team right now the best shot they can to win. And you wonder, number 49 right there at the bottom of the screen, Vitaly Kravtsov, if maybe that's a piece the Rangers GM will consider dangling. As this trade targets counter resets again to the top 5, Ricard Raquel and Max Domi are 2 guys who round out that list. Do you see any good fits for either of those 2?
I do. And I think Raquel has been the guy that's been linked to the Pittsburgh Penguins for 2 years now, right? We know they've been in on him. They were in on him last year, reportedly. They're supposed to be in on him right now. And again, he's someone who I think a few years ago was one of the better young forwards in the league. He has great hand-eye coordination. He was the 30-goal guy. He sort of fell into a rut of bad puck luck. It's bounced back a bit for him this year. And to me, he's someone that in the right situation, if you put him on a line with an Evgeny Malkin type, I think we could see production that we've never seen from Ricard Raquel just based on the talent. To me, he's someone who could be a difference maker in the right situation. Absolutely. That's a team that I think, and I know I keep going back to this Penguins well, but that's the team out there that we know I think needs a forward more than anybody else.
If the Pittsburgh Penguins don't make a move, Matt Larkin is going to be livid on our broadcast. He will not stand for it. All right, we are 34 minutes away from the deadline. The final part of our interview series with Scott Burnside is Scott chatting with Brandon Walker, who works in team services. It's a really fascinating chat. Like I said, the full interview is up on the Suitcase and the Scribe's latest episode, but here is Scott with Brandon Walker.
Brandon, I'm so excited that we're going to be able to chat. And I only wish you were, how many feet are you away from the Nashville Predators trade deadline war room? Maybe you just take the phone and walk us by David Poyle's wall, see what the plans are.
That's where the good stuff is. I'm about probably about 50 feet away. So I'm probably better on this side of the wall right now.
What's this time of year like for you and your colleagues on 32 or 31 other NHL teams?
This would be for team services. This would be what year 4 going into 19 with the organization. Yeah, this is a crazy time of year for everybody in all operations or all hockey operations roles, I guess. I guess maybe a little bit more so in our world where we're starting to, think about the logistics of things that are going to happen at the end of this week, the start of next, where we're actually in Anaheim this year for it. So being on the road is a little different than being at home, and some of the challenges that may come up, but it's all part of it and part of something that hopefully with experience you're prepared for.
Now, tell me, I know every trade or every transaction is going to be different, but what happens when you get the call, by the way, we've made this transaction, because it may involve people leaving and arrive?
Yeah, it's funny because I think it's almost like the snowflake thing where no two are exactly the same. We've had plenty of ones at home that should go really well, and then whether it's weather or travel delays or immigration or whatever, they just don't. We've had some that have been on the road where you think, holy smokes, how in the heck are we ever going to get this guy from here to there? And it actually goes quite well, and he's in the building 10 hours later. So for us, it's getting the word from David, obviously, that something's happened. Trade deadline's a little different than maybe even what would happen in the summer. In the summer, you would, wait a little bit to contact the player, whatever. Here, it's like, we're probably gonna have to call you in the first, 10, 15 minutes after you've heard the news to start thinking about what the next steps are. And then from there, it's, like I said, the proximity of where a guy might be, or, how we're going to get to him, how he's going to get to us, those different kind of things. Some of their own personal situations come into play, whether it's, a guy who maybe has family at home and needs to stay an extra day or two to get them settled, or if they're going to come with him or whatever. What our schedule is coming up in the next 24 to 48 hours can also determine that. If we have a day off or we have some type of situation where we're not in as much of a rush, then we can probably take our time. There's also times where it's like, do you think you could play tonight? And could we get a private jet or something else so that we could make that happen?
It's not just a guy and his gear and his sticks, but like there are family issues for lots of guys that also sort of come under your mandate as well. And maybe people don't understand that it's not just, do you have your skates and your sticks?
Yeah. And again, that's where the summer is a little different than the trade deadline. The trade deadline, there's a little bit more of that. Okay, we'll take care of that stuff as we go. Where in the summer, there's a lot more planning and everything, but it's absolutely important for us to think about the families and to think about a player's personal situation from the minute that he's acquired by us. It's something that I'm sure everybody prides themselves on, but we really do, to make sure that players know that this is a family for them as well.
What's the biggest lesson you've learned in doing this job as long as you have?
I think, like you said before, that, taking care of somebody on and off the ice is the most important thing. These guys are playing at the highest level possible. They deserve to be, treated as well as we possibly can to help them do their jobs better. I think that's really important. I guess the other thing I've learned is to always have my cell phone charged. Those would be the two things. Those are the two main things right there.
Deadline special, almost 30 minutes on the nose until the deadline will hit. A couple of notes to pass along here. Our friend Jeremy Rutherford from The Athletic reporting that there is a 50% retention in the Nick Leddy deal. So Detroit keeping half of his salary, a minor trade. Actually, no, maybe minor trade isn't the right way to put it, but a pair of Canadian teams making a swap. The Winnipeg Jets acquiring right winger Zach Sanford from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for a 2022 fifth round pick. And we are officially within that 30-minute window until deadline day. The LA Kings have made an announcement here. I'm seeing Blake Lizotte has signed a 2-year contract extension. So another piece of news there, $1.675 million cap hit. So not only have we seen some trades today, but we've also seen a handful of signings as well. Jake DeBrusk was one of the players who got a new deal, a 2-year contract with a $4 million cap hit. Interesting because that's right around where his qualifying offer would have been as well, or a hair underneath. But let's go back to our main panel here with Scott Burnside and Mike McKenna. And let's go there, out to Boston. That Jake DeBrusk deal, I think a lot of people saw and initially went, whoa, is everything okay now? Have they mended the fences in between Boston and DeBrusk? Doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. Apparently the trade request is still going, or is still in. But what do you think of that move, and what do you think the Bruins could maybe look to do here in the final 30 minutes, Mike?
Well, this is such a perplexing situation, because you have a player who's on the top line now, Patrice Bergeron, even though he hasn't been in the last couple games, and Brandon Marchand. And it was like a new lease on life for DeBrusk. Played incredible off the bat, and he's cooled off slightly, but the trade request is still there. And with him having pending RFA, or having a qualifying offer coming his way that was going to be well over $4 million, that was scaring off teams for any trade. So it's more palatable now, I would think, one, for the Bruins, if they keep him around having that contract, and two, it makes it a little bit easier to move if they're able to. I just find it odd. Like, this is a player who probably should, at this stage of it, be happy, but he isn't, and for whatever reason, that's fine. So I'm curious with the Bruins, because they've made the big move to get Hampus Lindholm. That was fantastic for them. I do like their top three lines right now. I think they're so solid, especially that third line with Frederick, Coyle, and then mixing in Smith on the right side, who's been scoring. So Bruce Cassidy seems to unlock that lineup in Boston, but I do think they could still use some depth. The fourth line's been in flux all year. So if they could find some added scoring in a third, fourth line role, I could easily see it happening in Boston.
Scott, what are you expecting from the Boston Bruins here as we head up to the 30-minute mark? They're part of that interesting group in the Eastern Conference and in the Atlantic Division specifically, where it feels like everybody wants to load up, everybody wants to add. We saw them make a big splash for Hampus Lindholm, so I'm not sure if they maybe have enough ammo to do it again, but what could you see Don Sweeney and the Bruins getting up to here?
Yeah, and I think, you have to tip your hat to Don Sweeney and the work he's done in the last 2 or 3 years. Very, he's controlled the cap very nicely. The ability to bring in Hampus Lindholm and then to extend him right away. I know some people talk about, is the 8 years too many? That's a cost of doing business if you're trying to keep top-end defensemen or top-end players in your lineup. But I am curious about DeBrusk, because as Mike pointed out, I mean, maybe it makes him more marketable between now and the end of the deadline. There will be teams that would love to have a player like Jake DeBrusk. Agreed, it's probably time for a change of scenery. You can't take him out of that lineup without making a commensurate ad. So whether it's if you can find a taker for Jake DeBrusk, could you bring in our Rickard Rakell, or could you make the money work that way? But I don't see the Bruins doing anything that detracts from that lineup in moving DeBrusk, unless they can get at least a sort of an even move coming back, or at least an upgrade. I think that Bruin team is interesting. They're going to be a handful in the playoffs. I think Swayman's, he's untested at that level, but I think he's got the tools to make life difficult, whether the Bruins stay in the wild card spot. I think there's a possibility they could catch the Leafs and move into that third spot. Sets up an interesting dynamic, regardless of how it cuts for the Bruins in the first round. With that core and their experience, they're going to be a handful.
Let's move along here and dig into our trade targets list a little bit with Frank Saravalli. So Mike, Scott, will chat with you in a few minutes here as we creep closer to the trade deadline. And Frank, let's start at the top of this list here. Let's run through it and see who maybe could be on the move or who could be staying put in the 25 minutes leading up to the deadline. But in the top 5, Kopp, Rakell, Domi still available. Hearing anything on any of those three?
My mic was muted there. Andrew Kopp, the Winnipeg Jets continue to work the market on Kopp. They had 2 second-round picks on the table for Andrew Kopp last night. Kevin Cheveldayoff was trying to hold out till some point this afternoon to see if he could get a first. I think the Colorado Avalanche were one of the teams that were in the mix. They end up going with Arturi Lehkonen. So in this case, I wonder which teams are left still in the mix for Andrew Kopp. I would have to think the New York Rangers are one of them. Rickard Rakell coming down to the wire. That is definitely going to happen. And I'd be very surprised if Max Domi also isn't traded from the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's not re-signing there, pending unrestricted free agent. They gave up a lot to get him in Josh Anderson, who's still with Montreal. So to think that Domi wouldn't move before the deadline, that would be a bit of a surprise if they ended up hanging on to him.
Keep going here outside of the top 5 into the next group of players here. We have Tyler Mott of the Canucks, Tyler Bertuzzi, Sean Monahan, and Jacob Chychrun. Chychrun is a big one. Our YouTube live chat has been asking questions about him all show. These 4, all on the move, all staying put, anything like that?
It's been pretty quiet on Tyler Mott today. Tyler Bertuzzi also haven't heard much, but I still think the Calgary Flames are out there and kicking around, trying to maybe do one more thing. So if they are going to do something, one way to move out a body, to move out some cap space that would help you achieve that deal both now and give you flexibility in the summer when you try and re-sign a guy like Johnny Gaudreau, that would be Sean Monahan. So keep an eye on Monahan and the Flames. I think they're trying to do everything they can to improve their team over these next 23 minutes.
Chychrun, anything or nothing?
I have not heard anything really in the last 3 to 4 days on Jacob Chychrun. I think there have been a couple teams that have checked in, but nothing really too serious. But again, anything could happen.
I'm just going to keep rolling through the top 50 here, and you tell me if you need to bounce because there's someone more important than me on the line. But Georgiev at 11, Connor Garland at 12, Besser 13, Calvin DeHaan, one of the few defensemen remaining, and Jesper Bratt at 15. Any of those names stand out as guys who you think could get moved right away?
Yeah, I think Calvin DeHaan would be another guy from the Chicago Blackhawks that are trying to maximize their rebuild and get as many picks as possible. I've heard continuous chatter all day between the Vancouver Canucks and Connor Garland, potentially Brock Besser as well. Georgiev threw a shutout for the New York Rangers on Sunday night against the Hurricanes, his sort of send-off into the deadline. The goalie market has been a little bit odd today. You saw the moving musical chairs. You saw Capo Kakinen going to the San Jose Sharks after the Minnesota Wild got Marc-Andre Fleury. And then you look at the Sharks and you're like, okay, well, now they have 3 goaltenders. Is James Reimer potentially on the move? Lots of different moving parts there on the goalie market.
The next batch of players, we got Carson Soucy at 16. Travis Konechny, another one of those young guys who has some years of team control left. 3 more seasons at a $5 million AAV. Colin Miller, the right shot D-man out in Buffalo. Pavel Zacha in New Jersey. And Anton Forsberg, obviously, already off the list. But Travis Konechny is an interesting one for me, Frank. But are you hearing anything there?
No, I don't think the Flyers have been very active on that front after Justin Braun. I think they were kind of now turning their attention to some nibbling around the edges. Hang on a sec. You know what? I think I got something here. I'm going to have to pop back in.
Okay, talk to you later, Frank. That's exciting, hey? Just in mid-conversation with the guy, and he goes, I got sources. Get out of here. But we will chat with Frank again in just a second here. The next group on the trade targets list, so it was John Gibson at 21, Philip Zadina at 22, Johan Larsson. He is off the board now. He is on his way to the Washington Capitals. Alexander Barabanov in San Jose. He's having a pretty decent year. Low cap hit, pending UFA. I saw some reports earlier today that maybe they weren't even talking extension. Cal Clutterbuck at 25 was one of the new ads to the list. 20 minutes to go until the deadline. And actually, let's go back to Mike McKenna and Scott Burnside here. And Mike, specifically, I want to ask you a little bit about John Gibson. 28 years old, 5 more years, $6.4 million AAV. I would imagine there'd be no shortage of teams lining up for this guy. I also look at Anaheim and go, hey, if you're looking to contend in the next 2 or 3 seasons, why are you trading a 28-year-old goalie? But what do you make of the Gibson rumors? And do you think Anaheim would maybe be wise to just hold on to this guy as they sort of get through the final stages of their retooling process?
Well, John Gibson has a name, a very good name, and he's known as one of the best goaltenders in the league when he's on. The problem is that he has not been on a lot this year, especially in the second half of the season. And I know it's been chalked up a lot to how that team has played in the past several years, but I see so many structural deficiencies to his game. He ends up spread. He doesn't stay between his posts. He's toes up. He's out of control. I really have concerns about his game. And I think that any team that would make a move for him might end up very disappointed. And I think that it's going to come down to whether John Gibson's willing to really put the work in and update his game. It hasn't changed much in the last 4 to 5 years. He hasn't overhauled it to what the modern standard is in my eyes. The thing is that we're talking about here, Tyler and Scott, there's a lot of GMs that just love John Gibson. I mean, he's on the radar. USA Hockey, he'll be an Olympian no matter what. He was an all-star this year. Like, his name has carried him, and the wins totals that the Ducks had early in the season have carried him. But I don't know if anybody.
Oh, I think we might have lost Mike's connection there. We can keep that conversation going here, Scott. I mean, it would be one of the, if Gibson were to move, and it was interesting just to see how the guy wasn't ranked in our top 50, and then when the final list drops, this guy shoots all the way up to 21 on the list, and that really got me thinking. But what do you make of sort of the Gibson rumors there out of Anaheim, and what could potentially go down?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I didn't see the John Gibson as a real trade deadline guy, and Mike and I have been talking about it, and I think Matt alluded to my conversation with Ryan Miller a couple weeks ago about the dangers or the pitfalls of adding a number one goalie at the trade deadline. For me, the issue, I think the real question is John Gibson part of an off-season move or change within the Ducks and their future? You've got Pat Verbeek, who's just newly into his job as a GM there. We've seen the enormous moves he's made with Josh Manson, Hampus Lindholm. We expect Rickard Rakell to go in the next 17 minutes and 20 seconds. To me, John Gibson is an off-season move where you have a lot more teams that you can deal with. And this gives Pat Verbeek a little bit more time to really get in touch with his hockey ops people, really have some candid conversations with the coaching staff, maybe with John Gibson himself. Mike alluded to putting in the work, to being, to really maximizing his enormous potential. And if Pat Verbeek, because John Gibson's not his guy, so Pat Verbeek can make that hard choice if he feels the organization needs to go in a different direction in terms of the goaltending there. But to me, that strikes me as a deal that is much more likely to happen at the draft or the lead up into the draft in Montreal, after they've had to some real soul searching about whether they believe John Gibson is the guy that they can ride out of this rebuild, which is now 4 or 5 years in the making.
Mike, the last question I want to ask you, great to have you back, by the way. The San Jose situation the San Jose situation that Frank touched on, they bring in Kaapo Kähkönen, they got Aaron Dell, he's under team control. James Reimer has a year left on the deal. I'll put you in the position of being in charge of the San Jose Sharks now that you have Kaapo Kähkönen in the mix. Would you be aggressively shopping Reimer?
Protection. So I'm not sure if that's going to be what ends up happening there. And really, to me, it comes down to what's the plan for Kaapo Kähkönen. Do the Sharks believe that he could be their goalie in the future? They already made a move for Aiden Hill last year, who was supposed to be their goalie of the future. And quite frankly, San Jose, especially earlier in the season, would have been much closer to a playoff spot if they would have let James Reimer play more often instead of trying to force Aiden Hill into being their starting goaltender. He just didn't come up with it. And so now they're at a crossroads. You got Kähkönen, who's an RFA, who's going to play games. You've got Reimer there for a couple more years. You got Hill for another year. Like, where do you go? So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I think that you could easily see Hill get moved. I'd be more surprised with Reimer because he's been a rock. He brought him in to be a veteran there. He has that trade protection in his contract. I think you're going to end up seeing either Kähkönen and Hill or Reimer. Or I could see Kähkönen, if things don't go well, get flipped out again later on. So it's definitely a three-headed monster, unless somebody makes a play here shortly. I'd be surprised, I guess, put it this way, if it was Kähkönen and Hill as the two goaltenders in San Jose next year.
Let's get back to our 5 best and worst trades of the salary cap era in the NHL trade deadline. Are we on number 2 or are we on number 1? I'm afraid I have absolutely lost count. I think we're on number 2 in our countdown. Yes, we are. Producer Alex flashing up the peace sign to me. We are at number 2 on Matt Larkin's countdown of the best and worst trades of the salary cap era. Let's roll it.
At number 2 on the worst trades list, we have the blockbuster from 2014 in which the St. Louis Blues went all in, acquired star goaltender Ryan Miller from the Buffalo Sabres for a big package that included a first-round pick, Chris Stewart, some other pieces, and it flopped. Miller was so-so in the balance of the regular season. In the playoffs, the Blues got off to a hot start against the Chicago Blackhawks in round 1. They ended up dropping 4 straight. They bomb out of the playoffs in round 1. Miller's save percentage goes below 900. So big package surrendered. Miller just never gets into a rhythm with his new team. And you don't have to follow my word for it. You can look on our website, interview with Scotty Burnside, Ryan Miller, details why that trade went wrong. At number 2 on the best trades list, I'm going to cheat and name 2 trades because they're just so linked. Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow, 2020. Those 2 guys, they were line mates for 2 years, part of 2 Cup championship teams in Tampa. I have to talk about them together. They were acquired just days apart. Julien Brisebois knows the sacrifice he has to make. The year before, Tampa wins 62 games, gets swept in the first round. Anything less than a Cup final appearance, I think, is unacceptable in 2020. So what does Brisebois do? He trades first-round picks to get 2 guys that are sort of role players, or at least middle 6 forwards, but they help the penalty kill. They help Tampa learn how to win ugly, not just pretty. And we saw 2 straight Cup runs. Coleman and Gaudreau, crucial members of that team, formed a dynamite third line with Yanni Gourde. No regrets on those trades, absolutely, even if it seemed like a high cost at the time for Julien Brisebois.
Back on the Daily Faceoff trade deadline special, 12 minutes, just over 12 minutes until the trade deadline hits. Of course, I am legally obliged to tell you that deals can come in after the 3 o'clock Eastern deadline. But as we creep closer to 3 p.m. Eastern, let's bring back Pete Blackburn here and talk about a few of the moves we've seen sort of trickle down here. And it's been a fairly quiet day, Pete. I don't think there's been too much that has really sort of blindsided anyone in terms of these moves. Is there been a team that's been quiet? I'll ask you this question again. We talked about it off the top of the show, but now that it's been a few hours, is there a team that's quiet that you're looking at and just going, they're not staying quiet, they're going to get something done?
Well, I think the New York Rangers are one of those teams. I mean, we were talking about how much flexibility they had and the fact that they were on forwards, defensemen. It seemed that they were pretty active, and they haven't really utilized that flexibility for the most part. And I think that they're one of those teams that has still been linked to some forwards that are left on the block and on the market. So I could see them making a splash here towards the end.
The other names at the top of our trade targets list still include Rickard Rakell and Max Domi, 2 forwards. Just from me sort of perusing Twitter and seeing some of the connections that have been made here, Rakell maybe to a team like Vegas is a possibility. We've heard the Bruins in the mix as well. Is there a team that you look at with Rakell and go, they'd be a good fit?
Yeah, I mean, Vegas, New York, another one of those teams. The Bruins, those are teams that we've heard all linked to him. I think it all makes sense. From a Bruins fan's perspective, I think that Boston would like to add something to their forward group. I just don't know. We do know that Don Sweeney absolutely loves dealing with the Anaheim Ducks. I don't know if he believes that he's allowed to deal with any of the 30 other teams. He only makes deals with the Ducks. So that's a possibility. Wouldn't be shocked if they were in on Rakell as well.
It's going to be interesting. We'll see if we get anything spicy down the stretch here, Pete Blackburn. And when we do, we'll be coming right back to Pete for instant reaction to those deals. I think we may have something being done here, so just waiting. Frank, yes? Yes? Okay, let's go to
Andrew Kopp is heading to the New York Rangers from the Winnipeg Jets. We had discussed that possibility or hinted at that possibility over the last little bit here, but waiting on the return, New York Rangers, Andrew Kopp.
There we go. Thank you very much, Frank. The second name, number 2 on our trade targets board, he is off. Fleury, then Kopp, both Belt, Nick Leddy, he gone, Rickard Rakell, Max Domi. We will wait and see what happens. If we have Pete, let's go right back to Pete here. And we were just talking about the New York Rangers, and looks like they got it done. Andrew Kopp is going to the Big Apple MSG. Pete, to me, this feels like kind of a perfect fit.
Yeah, it's a guy who can give them some versatility, can play, up and down the lineup. But I think that, he's a guy that they've sort of been looking for. And, I think that he makes them a much better team, tougher team to play against heading down the stretch. So again, one of those players that they kind of can plug in and out, and it gives them a little bit of flexibility and sort of a commodity at this point in time.
We'll see what the return ends up being here. Just looking over the picks that the Rangers have, they do still own their first rounder this year and next year. They actually own St. Louis's second rounder this year as well as their own. So New York has a handful of picks that they could choose from here. When you look at that Metropolitan Division now, the Rangers have gone out. They get Braun. They get Kopp now. Have they done enough, in your opinion, to close the gap between them and the Carolina Hurricanes, who have been kind of sitting still?
I don't know if they closed the gap that that existed there. I think that we all know the Rangers are a team that have been carried by Igor's performance for most of this year, and they've had their holes. I just think that the MO for them was to close the gap between where they are in the standings and where they should be in the standings. If that makes sense. I think that this team has been closer to a pretender than a real contender so far. But now they've gone out and added a few pieces that can help them, win some games if Igor is not having his best night or if he's having an off night. So the Rangers absolutely needed to bridge the gap between pretender and contender. And I think that they've done, they haven't done a spectacular job, but I think they've gotten better, and that's been a step for them.
7.5 minutes to go until the deadline. Thank you very much, Pete. Andrew Kopp is going to the New York Rangers. We will wait until we see the return on it to get an official Gears grade on this thing. Well, but let's bring in Chris Gear anyways, actually, here. 7 minutes to go until the deadline, Chris. When you are sitting in a war room of an NHL front office and there's 7 minutes to go until the deadline, what's the mood like? What's being talked about? What's the general vibe?
Yeah, again, it's super tense. And in my particular role, one thing I always did if we had a deal or a couple of deals that were on the table was I would have my email to NHL Central Registry pre-typed with what I thought the deal was going to be or what had been discussed, because you need to get that email in, and a receipt needs to come from Central Registry before that 3 p.m. Eastern deadline. And so the last thing you want to do is have a deal come in with 1 or 2 minutes to go, and then you go and try and compose that email and get it in. Because if you're late, all that work is for nothing. So I used to have a couple of different options. Maybe there were 2 teams we were speaking with, or maybe it was a different pick in a couple of different scenarios. I'd have those things ready to go. And when we landed the deal, hit send just to make sure.
I always think in these last minute scenarios of that scene from Moneyball, where they're working their phones and this guy's being put on hold and this guy's talking to this guy and the phone lines are ringing off the hook. What's it actually like in that sense? Like how active are the phone lines? Is it just constantly buzzing or ringing off to the side?
Absolutely. You've got, a couple of different people working phones, but, especially the GM hangs up one call, immediately dials another team or calls the agent or calls, anybody that can have information about where the deal might head. And it's constantly, you got to keep one line open and one line that's being used. And you just hope that in those final few minutes, what you've worked hard to put together can crystallize into a deal.
Michael Russo of The Athletic just passing this along. He does say the Minnesota Wild do have one more trade coming, so that's something to keep an eye on. I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of reports about what teams still have on the go as we creep closer to the deadline here. We are almost at that 5-minute mark. We don't know what the return is for Kopp in terms of the deal with the New York Rangers, but I'll put you on the spot a little bit here for a Gears grade presented by 3Ice. Head to 3ice.com, hit that tickets tab for more info. 6 different U.S. cities, 2 stops in Canada. It is the new professional 3-on-3 hockey league. Just grading purely the fit here, Chris. Yeah. What do you give the Rangers for this?
Well, Kopp is a guy that probably 32 teams would like to have on their team. He's he can play those gritty third line minutes, but he can also score points. He's very versatile, can play up and down your lineup. So, again, for a young team like the Rangers to add a guy like this who they can plug and play in different spots or with different, sets of forwards, it's a really strong move for them. Sounds like you've got something going there. Should we cut?
Yes, we do. Frank Saravalli is giving me the wave. He's got something else. Let's cut over to Frank Saravalli. It is a frantic finish here on deadline day. Frank, what's going on?
Yeah, we are closing in on a clean sweep of the top 7 on the Daily Faceoff top 50, at least because number 7, Tyler Mott, is heading from the Vancouver Canucks, I'm told, to the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2023 fourth-round pick. The last guy remaining in our top 5 would be Max Domi from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Working hard to find out what's going on there with Max Domi. Ricard Raquel also in the mix. Lots of rumblings. Ricard Raquel, I'd be very surprised if he is not on the move in very short order here over these next 3 minutes and 15 seconds. But to recap, Tyler Mott going from the Vancouver Canucks to the New York Rangers in exchange for a 2023 fourth-round pick. So Kopp and Mott going to the Rangers. The Rangers are getting better.
Thank you very much, Frank. Let's break down this Rangers situation here. We'll bring back Pete Blackburn here. We were surprised that they were sitting on their hands for as long as they were, Pete, but you go out, you get Kopp, you get Mott. It feels like they've done a good job here of building up some depth that could really push them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm not an insider. I promise I wasn't cheating by picking the Rangers there. But yeah, I think that with those two trades, Kopp and Mott, you get two guys that have versatility to them. It's going to help your depth. It's going to, you're able to plug and play in the lineup a little bit, and it definitely helps your special teams. So those are all areas of need and areas where the Rangers were hoping to improve. So took a little while, but they're there, and they've made some additions that are going to help them down the stretch.
Yeah, they've quickly become, I believe, the busiest team here on deadline day and in deadline week in general. The Frank Vetrano ad earlier in the week. Now you got Mott. Now you got Kopp. Now you have Justin Braun as well. So Chris Drury making his mark in his first deadline as Rangers GM. Pete, we'll be with you in a minute 50 once we hit the deadline as well. We'll be doing a big roundtable with Pete, McKenna, and Burnside. Quickly, though, let's get a Gears grade on this bad boy. Chris Gear is brought to you again by 3 Ice, the new professional 3-on-3 hockey league. Chris, it is Mott going for a 4th. What grade are you giving this one?
Well, for the Rangers, this is an excellent deal. Tyler Mott is a Swiss Army knife, great utility player. He's got a little more offense than people think. Maybe not quite as much as Kopp, but he can score really big goals. You saw him in the bubble tournament a couple of years ago with Vancouver. Came up with some amazing goals. He hits everything that moves, even though he's a small guy. He excellent on the penalty kill. He skates a million miles an hour. He just gives you so much. Really, really versatile player. And same with Kopp, both these guys. So I give the Rangers an A on both of them. And a little underwhelming return, frankly. What it tells me is that the Canucks might have gotten into extension discussions with Mott and realized that they weren't prepared to pay his price for a deal going forward, and they decided to just get something at the end of the day instead of letting him go for nothing. But yeah, definitely, I think they would have wanted to get something higher than a 4th. But for the Rangers, really big move.
Thank you very much, Chris. There you go, recapping those 2 Rangers deals. As we head to the final seconds here until the trade deadline, Peter Baugh, our friend out in The Athletic, covers the Colorado Avalanche. He is reporting that the Avalanche are indeed done for the day. Josh Manson, Arturi Lehkonen, Nico Sturm, and Andrew Cogliano will be the deadline additions or week of additions for the Colorado Avalanche. And there we go. The horn has gone. The deadline has hit. It is 3 o'clock Eastern. The NHL's trade deadline has arrived. So let's bring in our, whenever you can, get our 4-plex here with Mike McKenna, Scott Burnside, and Pete Blackburn as we all sit with our eyes glued on Twitter and wait to see all the reports pour in. We'll definitely get some sort of deals here. Chris Johnson of TSN reporting that Jacob Chychrun was not moved before the deadline. If that does indeed stand, Pete, what's your thought on the Yotes holding on to this guy? I mean, to me, it just makes sense. Like, you have a good young defenseman, cost controlled, all that stuff. Yeah, don't rush to move him at the deadline.
Yeah, it's been my thought all along, and I don't understand. There at various points it seemed like the Coyotes were being aggressive in shopping him, and I just didn't understand it. He's a guy that you absolutely can hold on to, should hold on to. He's one of the, I know that they're not in a position to be competing anytime soon, but you got to have something there for that team to build around and be excited about. And, given his age, given his skill set, given how much it costs and how good of a value that contract is, absolutely no reason to be rushing him out of town. If he doesn't have a desire to be rushed out of town and you're not getting any packages that are blowing you away. The only way that you deal a guy like that is if you're blown away by a package of futures that will come in the mix for you. And if they didn't get that, absolutely worth it to hold on to Jacob Chychrun.
Ricard Raquel and Max Domi are the last two in our top five, still up on our trade targets list. Scott Burnside, Raquel, and Domi. You see a fit out there that you think could be coming in at the last moments here?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see, whether both those guys go, because it does seem like they are destined to be moving on from both the Ducks and the Blue Jackets, respectively. Certainly being here in Carolina and actually watching the Rangers pitch a 2-0 shutout last night against Carolina, a game in which they were badly outplayed for the majority of the game. And I know there's been a lot of sort of outward concern in Caniac Nation about the lack of scoring for the Carolina Hurricanes. They're winless in 4. The offense has dried up somewhat. I think they're still 9th in the NHL in goals per game. And so I know in talking to GM Don Waddell, they are very protective of their assets in terms of draft picks and young prospects. They gave up a first and a third in the offer sheet with Jesperi Kotkaniemi. So I'm not surprised that we hadn't heard Carolina's name at this stage, going into a situation where they were bringing in a top 6 forward or someone a scoring element in the top 9, if it was going to cost high-end draft picks. That just wasn't what the Carolina Hurricanes were looking at doing. It will be interesting to see with both Domi and Raquel whether the price dropped as the clock ticked down towards the 3 p.m. deadline, and what team, whether it was Carolina or another team looking to bolster offense, could get in maybe with a little bit of a bargain at the end.
Couple of reports coming out of Vancouver that the Canucks are done for the day, so it will be just the Tyler Mott move for Vancouver. Keep an eye on a few other things. Mark Spector out in Edmonton saying the Oilers have acquired forward Derek Brassard, so some depth for Edmonton. They got Brett Kulak earlier in the day to shore up their blue line. They had a bottom 6 option in Derek Brassard as well. Our friend Samantha Pell out in Washington saying the Washington Capitals are done for the day. And I'm actually, Mike, let me throw you a question about the Washington Capitals here, as I also keep an eye on Frank Saravalli, because I think I know Frank's tells. He's not a very good poker player. I think he might have something cooking right away here. But Frank, Mike, with the Washington Capitals, they get Larson, they get Johansson, a couple of bottom 6 pieces. You look at that Metro division, it was largely quiet today. Have the Washington Capitals, who've struggled for a while, have their moves today changed your mind on them at all?
No, not really. I think they're still in that same category. I think the biggest thing for the Capitals was getting Mantha back. That was kind of the self-add when he came back off of injured reserve after being out for a while. He's helped that club. I just still think that they really could use a piece at goal. I like Vanacek. I think he's done a great job. But Samsonov is the one that I question. Where is he ever going to reach his potential? It just, to me, Washington wasn't going to spend the price that was being asked to get top-end goaltending with the hope that Vanacek was going to be able to carry the load down the path here. And hey, listen, you don't know what a goalie can do in the playoffs until they get that chance. But I don't think Washington really was thinking they're in that same echelon. The problem is that in the East, man, you've got 7 other teams that just all geared up. They all added, and Washington a little bit, yeah, but nothing game-changing. So was there much that they could do to change their top 6? Maybe. I'm just a little bit surprised they didn't go a little bit harder here at the deadline to try to keep up with everybody else that's surrounding them in the East right now.
Yeah, just catching up on a few notes here. A couple of reports. Phil Kessel, not on the move out of Arizona. He will be staying put. Frank might have something here. We'll wait. Oh, do we? Yeah, okay, we do. Let's go to Frank Saravalli. What do we got, Frank?
Hearing that the Anaheim Ducks and the Pittsburgh Penguins are closing in on a trade for Rickard Rakell. So this is coming in, of course, just under the wire at 2:59. That I believe is in the trade queue. Let's wait and see what we get on a return. But it sounds like Rickard Rakell going to the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Let's go to Pete Blackburn and the rest of our panel here. Rickard Rakell to the Penguins. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting the Penguins to do much here. I kind of thought they would sit still, similar. Pete, what do you think? Rakell to the Penguins. Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Penguins did need help on the wing, and I think Rickard Rakell. You look at his skill set; he's got a really good shot, and he's an offensively gifted player. But he's also one of those guys that I don't think has reached sort of the ceiling that we had set for him years ago. And I go back and forth on Rickard Rakell a little bit, but I do think that this fit is really good in Pittsburgh, and if there's an opportunity for him to sort of hit his peak and produce to the best of his ability, Pittsburgh is not a bad spot for him to land, especially with how deep they are down the middle. So I like the fit, and depending on what the return is, I think it's a good deal for Pittsburgh.
Mike McKenna, your thoughts on Rickard Rakell?
I think fit is the key. It's what was just said. I mean, like, you go to Pittsburgh and how many careers have taken off once you get there. A good example of that, look at Mike Matheson on defense for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yeah. He's been really, really good for them after spending part of his career in Florida trying to get things going. I know it's D to forwards, but you put Rakell into that lineup, especially if you're talking anything power play, if you're talking anything on the wings, he's going to help them. And I've kind of been up and down on Rakell's game as well, but it's always been the wonder of where's Anaheim at? And does he get quality players surround him on all scenarios? Can he produce more than what he is? I mean, he's a first-round pick. You expect him to be a superstar, but I think realistically, Rickard Rakell is a very good NHL player who fits seamlessly into Pittsburgh. And like Ron Hextall, GM of Pittsburgh, isn't typically taking big swings at the deadline. Look how smart he was to bring in Jeff Carter last year. Big-time undercover trade that's worked out really well for them. Now he's extended on. So I like this. I think that Rakell is going to move, and obviously Anaheim must be getting something of value back because I'm sure there are multiple teams involved in the talks to get Rakell.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the wave from Frank Saravalli to see if we can get the return on a Rickard Rakell, but nothing yet. This Penguins forward group, suddenly you look at it and you go, like, it's crazy how one player with the trickle-down effect can really change your perception of the whole group, because they were running Gensel, Crosby, Evan Rodriguez, Malkin with Danton Heinen and Brian Rust, Dominic Simone, Jeff Carter, and Kasperi Kapanen. All of a sudden, maybe you flip a righty to the left side or something like that, and you look and go, those are three pretty dang good scoring lines that the Pittsburgh Penguins have going on, right, Scott?
Well, yeah, and part of the issue in bringing in Rickard Rakell is that Kasperi Kapanen has not done what they've expected him to do in Pittsburgh in terms of consistent production. Jason Zucker's been out of the lineup for a long time, injury issues there. Evan Rodriguez, who got off to just a blazing hot start for the Penguins, has cooled off somewhat. So I think there was some real legitimate concerns, even though the depth appeared on paper to be there. Was it going to be there when it really counted come playoff time? And could you rely on one of those guys either to get healthy in Zucker's case or the other two to really pick up the pace? Rickard Rakell is a terrific insurance policy. The offseason is going to be crazy in Pittsburgh when you think of Malkin, Chris Letang, both coming to the ends of their deals. Now Rickard Rakell, another expiring contract coming into Pittsburgh. I think it's fascinating because I do see a Pittsburgh Rangers series to start the playoffs, and two teams that have really made significant moves to shore up their offense, certainly, and their depth up front. I think it sets up a very interesting first round matchup if it turns out to be Rangers Pittsburgh, which is how I see it happening.
Luke Fox reporting that the Toronto Maple Leafs are done. So just the one deal seemingly for Toronto, picking up Mark Giordano. And it's actually a little surprising when you look at that division and what Boston was able to do, getting Lindholm, Tampa obviously loading up, Florida making the two huge moves. And you look there, Toronto actually the team that you could argue did the least to improve their team. So that'll be interesting to track come playoff time. We are now 10 minutes past the NHL trade deadline. Seeing some reports that the Brassard deal to Edmonton could be for a fourth rounder. Also seeing a little bit of chatter on the old Twitter machine that the Carolina Hurricanes may not be done yet, and the Columbus Blue Jackets may not be done yet. Of course, with Columbus, the big name to keep in mind there is Max Domi. He's the fifth name on our trade targets list, and he would be the last one in the top 7 who has not moved yet. So Domi, a pending UFA with that $5.3 million UAV, a guy who can play multiple forward positions, but has been fairly inconsistent over the last couple of seasons here. Who knows what we end up seeing here? Carolina's been a team that hasn't really made a splash yet. You look at the Rangers, now the Penguins, both teams in their division who have made moves. I don't know. I get the sense maybe Carolina, we're seeing that they're not done yet. They might be in the position here where they see the other teams in this division and they go, yeah, we got to do something now to improve our team.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talked to Don Waddell, as I mentioned, and I asked him that question. I mean, how do you guard against reacting because what everyone around you is doing? And we were chatting after Florida and Tampa had made the big moves, and you have to really steel against making a decision based on what someone that you might meet in the playoffs is doing to improve their own team. Now, can Carolina use some depth up front? Absolutely, they can. Could they win a Stanley Cup if they don't make a move? Absolutely. They're one of the best teams in the NHL, and they have their own players. You know, a year ago they kept Dougie Hamilton. This year they've got a couple of players on expiring contracts, Nino Niederreiter, Vincent Trocheck. So you have to keep things in perspective. But I think it's natural to look around you, and Don Waddell said, listen, you're aware of what's going on. That just can't dictate how you behave. But I think it is natural when you look around and see the competition. And the East, those 8 teams are very compact. There's not a lot that separates, top to bottom in the East. And I think it'll be fascinating then to see, is Carolina, do they dip their toe in the final seconds of this trade deadline?
I still have my eyes locked on Frank Saravalli to see if we have anything else coming down the pipe here. But just quickly, a couple of notes. Yes, Frank. Okay, let's get to our man Frank Saravalli. Frank, what do we got?
So there's a few things that are piling up in the NHL's queue. Lots of talk about Max Domi. He is heading to the Carolina Hurricanes. They got that in just under the wire. No word on a return yet. I'm also told that Ryan Carpenter he was a little bit further down on our list. He was in the 30s on our trade targets list, 35 if memory serves me correctly. He's heading to the Calgary Flames, another deal that just got done under the wire. And Derek Brassard is heading to the Edmonton Oilers. That is another trade that materialized late and I think surprised the heck out of some people in Philadelphia. I think the Flyers were working to move some other depth players, and Derek Brassard was not expecting to be on the move, and he ends up getting traded to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for a 4th-round pick. So that's just some of the deals that are in the queue. A clean sweep, as we mentioned on the Daily Faceoff trade targets. All of the top 7 end up getting traded. Fleury, Kopp, Leddy, Raquel, Domi. It has been a wild few days leading up to the NHL's trade deadline, and we're not quite done yet, Tyler.
We are not quite done yet. Those are the words I wanted to hear, Frank Saravalli. Let's go back to our panel here. A couple of other notes. A report from, I believe, Pierre LeBrun that James Reimer is staying put in San Jose. It is indeed from LeBrun. So San Jose going to have a bit of a 3-goalie system here going down the stretch. Mike McKenna, your thoughts on San Jose not finding a way to offload James Reimer? You're muted, I think, Mike.
Did he want to make the move? Did Reimer want to go? He had trade protection. There's 1 year left. He's provided a stability in that crease all season. And it sounds like to me San Jose did want to move on from Reimer, even though there were teams calling on him. There are some teams I was surprised it didn't move for goaltending depth at the deadline, and teams that we'd be surprised if. We haven't heard anything from Vegas. This is the first trade deadline. Nothing from Vegas just yet, unless something comes across the board. That's surprising to me. I just didn't see San Jose as a team that people were looking to pluck a goaltender from, because Reimer to me would have been your 1A, 1B. You know what you're getting. He's stable. He's happy there. So really what it comes down to, are you trying to bulk up in that position and give up something for Reimer, who's probably equal to a lot of the goaltenders on the market? So the goalie market to me is fascinating that we didn't see any of the big names move that we thought might, other than Fleury, up until the deadline here. And maybe you shouldn't be too surprised. It seems like a lot of teams looked around at the market and just said, this isn't worth it for us. But I'll tell you what, man, if you're Toronto or if you're in Edmonton and those teams lose in the first round of the playoffs or don't make playoffs and the goaltending looks bad, heads are going to roll, man, because they didn't address their goaltending at all. Harry Sateri got claimed off waivers by the Arizona Coyotes. So there was another potential option in Toronto not on the table. I think some of these teams may look back at this deadline and think, we should have done an awful lot more, no matter what the cost may have been in goal.
A couple of things we're keeping an eye on here. Max Domi going to the Carolina Hurricanes. We're still waiting for the return on that. Still have not gotten the official return on the Rickard Rakell deal, but he is going from the Anaheim Ducks to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Josh Yohe reporting that it could be a roster player heading back to Anaheim as part of the deal, along with a second-round pick and a prospect. So that will be interesting to keep an eye on as well. Domi to Carolina. Pete, I hinted at it a little bit. I think this makes sense. I think this is a guy who fits in pretty good there and maybe gives them a bit of a different look in sort of their top 9.
Yeah, depending on the price, I think it's probably worth a shot. The thing with Domi has always been that he's a bit of a wild card, and the inconsistency is a bit baffling and frustrating. But we know that he's capable of producing offensively. The 200-foot game is a bit of a concern. But when you're a team like Carolina and you seem to have sort of all the pieces in place, why not try to upgrade offensively in that top 9 and have a guy who has some versatility and importantly, some bite. I think that's one of the things that Carolina has missed in the past few years when they've gotten into the playoffs, is having that toughness and that bite and that grit that you kind of look for over the course of a deep playoff run and not getting pushed around. So not a bad kick of the can for Carolina to take a flyer on Domi here.
Scott, you're out there in Carolina. You're at their rink right now. What do you think of this deal?
No, again, the offense has been a question here in Carolina for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Martin Necas, high draft pick and a really skilled, nice player, but it's been a real struggle for him this season in terms of offensive production. And I think the ability to bring in a guy like Max Domi, he's not a scorer in the true sense of the word. He's not a sniper, but he can produce offense. He's going to play with really good players. It gives Rod Brind'Amour more options in that top 9 now to do a little mixing and matching. Some of his top guys are in a bit of a dry spell right now, but this is still an elite hockey team. They've added a top-end offensive player that meets this very specific need for this team right now. And again, I think the depth going into the playoffs, we talk about, keeping pace with the Joneses in the neighborhood. I think this is an important move for a Carolina team that was really solid to begin with. And we'll see how Max Domi fits out. Listen, the guy's playing for a contract. This is a pretty good place to come and try and drive your market value up.
All right. I think if my eyes don't deceive me, Frank Saravalli unmuted his mic. Frank, what do you got?
I did, yeah. We have the return for the Ryan Carpenter trade. He is going from the Chicago Blackhawks to the Calgary Flames in exchange for a 2024 fifth-round pick. So one of those depth moves that gets in right under the deadline.
I like that for Calgary. we can go back to our panel with this one, but this is a guy in Ryan Carpenter who can kill penalties for you, give you solid minutes in your bottom six, and all this cost you was a 5th-round pick. And you look at Calgary, I think they were pretty happy with their blue line coming into this deadline, and we had kind of heard they maybe looked at Mark Giordano, but then the CBA told them they weren't allowed to look at Mark Giordano. But you look at the way they addressed their forward group over the last kind of 8 weeks here, with Toffoli coming in, Yarncroc earlier in the week, and then you go out and get Ryan Carpenter to plug on the 4th line. They're very clearly the best team in the Pacific Division. Let me just throw this question out to the floor here if anyone has a take on it. Do you think this Calgary team can be good enough to come out of the Western Conference after these 3 additions they've made in the last few months?
I'm happy to take that one. I think absolutely. I think they were good enough before it, and I think now they're even better. I think that's you're adding weapons here that solidify a lineup that's really, really diverse in what they can do, and they're faster now. When you add Carpenter into the mix, somebody who can play, I really like Calgary in general across the board. It started off the season with me thinking, okay, Daryl Sutter effect, they can just play some defense, and then you watch that top line. Gaudreau, Lindholm, and Tkachuk are just phenomenal together, and now that they've added these pieces down the lineup, especially to their bottom six, when you start to wonder about playoff time, and being able to continue that pace of play under Sutter with how they play is not easy. So Carpenter's always been really highly regarded around the league, especially as a shutdown player, 4th-line role. He's going to fit there. It's just another piece for Calgary. I like that team, and I think they could give Colorado fits, man. They've played them hard this season. Those games have been wars. You start going into overtime where it's 5-on-5 and not 3-on-3. I like Calgary an awful lot.
Yeah, I think that Colorado is still the team to beat in the Western Conference, but it's probably a lot closer than some people are giving Calgary credit for, because I like what Colorado did today in terms of Lehkonen and Cogliano. I think that makes them tougher to play against down the stretch here. But I also look at what Calgary added, and their depth is awesome, man, up front and on the back end. And the one advantage that I would give them pretty clearly over Colorado heading into the playoffs is goaltending, and that can make all the difference in the world in the spring and summer months. So, I think that Calgary is definitely not a team to sleep on, and they are very close behind Colorado here in that Western Conference arms race.
Yeah. So this is a team that has undergone a pretty dramatic facelift since they won the division and then got knocked off in the first round by Colorado a few years ago. I think it's still a litmus test, though, for that core group of players. Johnny Gaudreau has never quite played in the playoffs the way a player of his stature should play. And this is contract year for him. I think this is an enormous playoff year for that entire organization. I agree. I think they're a terrific team. They're well coached, great goaltending, but this is, they're really going to have to prove it given the playoff disappointments that franchise has had in recent years.
We are 23 minutes post trade deadline. Just a reminder, something like that Mantha Veranda deal, it took 28 minutes post deadline for that thing to come down. Just reading some of the quotes that have come out today. Kyle Dubas, speaking to the media, talked a little bit about his disappointment that the Marc-Andre Fleury talks went public, and kind of threw, maybe you'd call it, some shade at the Chicago Blackhawks. He also said, when asked about losing Sateri on waivers, quote, "We've had 11 guys claimed, which I think is double what other teams have had taken off waivers." So interesting there out of Toronto. Catching up on a few other moves. Kevin Weeks is reporting that the Detroit Red Wings are trading Vladislav Nemesnikov to the Dallas Stars for a 4th-round pick. So another depth move coming in there. Like Frank said, he had the Brassard going to Edmonton for a 4th-rounder. A couple of reports about what we could be getting out of the return for Domi. Frank, do you have... I can't tell if Frank turned on his mic or not, so I'm just going to see. No, he didn't. Okay, we got nothing still from Frank. Waiting on a few returns here. The Domi deal still. We're waiting for those final pieces to come in on the Ricard Raquel deal as well. And actually, the Andrew Kopp deal. We haven't seen what the final deal was there either. So we're still waiting on a few potential returns here. It sounds like maybe it's 2nd-round picks and things like that. Could be some prospects involved as well. But the one new deal to report is from Kevin Weeks, and it's Vladislav Nemesnikov to the Dallas Stars Let's quickly here. We've been doing our countdown. There's been some big moves today. Will any of them go down as memorable enough to be considered the best trades of the salary cap era? Here is number 1 on Matt Larkin's countdown for best and worst deals.
At number 1 on the worst trade list, to finish it off, we know it has to be the 2013 trade in which the Washington Capitals give up their great forward prospect, Philip Forsberg, in a desperate move to bring in Martin Erat, who barely is a blip, doesn't help the team at all carrying to the next season, just a ghost out there. And it's foresight 2020. Everyone knew at the time that Forsberg was a great prospect, that he was going on to great things, and the Capitals lose him, get very little for it. Forsberg, meanwhile, becomes the best goal scorer in Predators franchise history. That one stings, and even though George McPhee has had a great career, that deal will follow him around forever. Finally, to finish off my best trades list, we have the Jeff Carter trade 2012. It's hard to believe Jeff Carter was a Columbus Blue Jacket. It was sort of just a blip on the radar. He was not happy there. Less than one season, he gets reunited with his Philly teammate Mike Richards. They bring him to the LA Kings, the 2011-12 team that goes on to win the Stanley Cup. And what's great about this trade, why it's number 1 for me, is it checks 2 boxes. It helps the team in the short term and long term. Of course, Carter was a crucial component of the Cup runs in 2012, but he was also there for 2014, and he ended up with a very nice long run, a decade with the LA Kings as one of their most important players. So to me, that's the definition of a perfect deadline trade. Helps you now and in the future, and that's why it's number 1.
Continuing to keep track of everything that's going down on or around the NHL here, TSN's Ryan Rashog reporting that Jake DeBrusk is remaining a Bruin and there is no trade coming there. So we continue to keep up here. LeBron also saying that Jake DeBrusk is staying put in Boston. So a couple of things that we continue to track here as we throw things back to our big panel here with Pete Blackburn, Mike McKenna, and Scott Burnside. Like I said, we're still waiting here. There's going to be some more returns that come down the pipe as we creep closer to 3:30 Eastern time here. We're getting reports that a few teams are done. I'll throw you guys this question. A lot of teams did get involved here, and when you look at the playoff picture, there weren't a lot of playoff teams that sat still. But which fan base do you think should feel the most disappointed in what their team was able to do? For me, I look at a team like St. Louis. Like, you're right in the thick of that Central Division. You watch the Colorado Avalanche go out and make a handful of moves. You watch the Minnesota Wild go out and get Marc-Andre Fleury, and their only addition was Nick Leddy on the blue line, who, like we've all talked about, maybe an average addition at best. Pete, I'll start with you on this. Is there a fan base out there that you think should be sitting there going, what was our GM thinking today?
I mean, I like to poke fun at the Toronto Maple Leafs at any chance that I get. And I think that you can be disappointed here if you're a Leafs fan. I mean, I know Mark Giordano is a nice ad, but he was basically gift wrapped to you because he wanted to go there. And then outside of that, you don't solve any of the issues in net. And, you're not really adding anything up front. So, if you're a Leafs fan, you see how much better other teams in the conference and in the division got. You look at Boston, you look at Florida, and, so I just think that, they kind of have the biggest question mark still on their plate, and that's goaltending. And I would say the same thing about the Edmonton Oilers as well. It's, I know that the goalie market was pretty thin. So if you lose out on Marc-Andre Fleury, you're already playing from behind. But, those two teams who are amongst the teams that have the most pressure on them to make a run this year and have the biggest question mark in between the pipes is very concerning.
Mike?
Well, I can riff on that because that's exactly the same feelings that I have. And I do agree with you, Tyler. I can already tell, being based in St. Louis, there's some heads being scratched right now. Sundqvist was a very well-liked player in St. Louis, but he's been so beat up the past couple of years. I'm not surprised by that. But the thought there is just Nick Leddy. This is what the Blues are getting. Well, you know what? They needed a left shot defenseman, and they needed somebody with experience. They needed somebody that can move the puck in a very, very consistent way. So I think the Blues actually were better here than people thought. I know they would have liked to have gotten somebody with term, probably from that standpoint. So I think the Blues is there, but really, how can you be Edmonton or Toronto and be happy with what you have because you didn't upgrade a net? It's been the story all year long. I can't see that. I already touched on it earlier. If either of those teams have anything of a goaltending controversy, which if they don't win, they will. It's inevitable. I mean, Freddie Anderson, I think, had like a 1.5 goals against average in the last playoffs, and Hawks or the Leafs lose, and guess who's the scapegoat? Like that's how it works in those cities. And to think that the Minnesota Wild went out and got Marc-Andre Fleury and the Toronto Maple Leafs couldn't pull it off,
Yeah.
that's where you start to look at these and think, did we do everything we could to make our team as good as they could be? And kind of the elephant in the room is Edmonton should have been getting a goalie 3 months ago. It shouldn't have been at the trade deadline. And there were plenty of goalies available then at different price points. It's just the fact that the whole league knew that Ken Holland had already created a pickle for himself because he didn't address it in the offseason, and he couldn't get a goalie for cheap then. So this is the reason why goaltending either has to be in-house, you have to develop it yourself, or you got to take care of it in the offseason, because in-season trades, they very rarely work, and man, they are expensive.
Scott, quickly in 30 seconds, your take on which fan base should be the most disappointed. Oh,
It's disappointed in Winnipeg. It's a Stanley Cup champion preseason pick for Mike, but I thought the Jets were close enough that they could have pushed the chips in a little bit. We don't know the return yet on Andrew Kopp, and I know an expiring deal. It's hard to watch the assets walk out the door for nothing. But man, I like that Jets team. They played a lot better of late. I think they could be a handful if they can sneak into the playoffs. So I'd be a little bit disappointed. You're real close. That West is still wide open because of the issues we talked about all day in Vegas, and Dallas is up and down. If I'm a Jets fan, I'm a little disappointed that basically, Andrew Kopp goes out, and that's a form of waving the white flag.
We heard a report that it may be a prospect going back for Max Domi and the deal between the Hurricanes and the Blue Jackets. Elliot Friedman reporting that it's Aiden Hirschchuk. So let's get a breakdown on that piece going back to the Columbus Blue Jackets with Chris Peters. It is the next wave as we welcome in Chris, and he was taken 94th overall in the 2021 NHL draft. Chris, what can you tell us about Aiden Hirschchuk?
Yeah, Aiden Hirschchuk is an interesting prospect, California kid who was drafted in the 3rd round out of the National Team Development Program. Played at Boston College this year, and he's a 5'11", puck-moving defenseman, two-way guy. He's got good two-way ability, pretty decent defender as well. Really like his feet, but only 8 points this year at Boston College. Not in the mix for the World Junior team. Very well could be for next year's World Junior team. I'm sure he'll get a training camp invite. But this is a C prospect, essentially. This is a guy that has a chance maybe to make it to the next level. He's certainly not a surefire guy that you're going to say, okay, well, he's definitely going to be part of our plans for the present day if you are the Columbus Blue Jackets. So, and I think you also look at the fact of what's the return from Max Domi in what you had to give up to acquire him as well, and thinking about Josh Anderson and those different things that are there. So, it's basically a 3rd round draft prospect who hasn't really improved on that standing. He's actually maybe fallen a little bit behind. But I do think there is room for him to improve. Like I mentioned, he's got a good base with his skating. There's also some decent puck moving abilities. And he's also just kind of one of those guys that he'll be in your system. You'll probably sign him. I think he'll probably end up earning a contract, which is, sometimes never a sure thing for those mid-round draft picks. But he's a guy that I think will eventually earn a contract. I think he'll probably be at Boston College for a few years, so he won't count against your contract limit for a while either. But he's a guy that's worth tracking and worth developing. So if you can get him into your system and maybe work on him a little bit, you'll have a better time. But Aiden Hirschchuk, not necessarily the most exciting prospect is what he's shown now, but certainly a guy with potential, enough potential to say, hey, maybe you got something there.
Thank you very much, Chris Peters. That is the next wave with Chris. Looking at our trade targets list a little bit here, like we said, the top 7 actually, all gone on our list. The only 3 names in the top 10 that did not end up moving. at least that we know of right now, are Tyler Bertuzzi, Sean Monahan, and Jacob Chychrun, but it still looks like we have a few deals just trickling in, and if there's not deals still trickling in, we're waiting on some confirmation from other moves. I'm not sure if we have any confirmation on any of those returns yet, Frank, but if we don't, we can head back to our panel here and our little fourplex with Pete Blackburn, Scott Burnside, and Mike McKenna. The Domi deal, I kind of look at that. You heard Chris kind of say a C-level prospect. You get Domi for something that happened right at the deadline. That makes me kind of like this deal a little bit more from a Hurricanes perspective.
Yeah, no, I think.
Anybody else surprised by this return?
Yeah.
As I am.
You mean how uninspiring it is?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of return. I mean, that shows where the market was on Max Domi, a guy who can put up 55 points in a regular season, maybe 60 regularly. But that's where his game's at now, that there's that many question marks. To me, that's a home run for Carolina, even if you're just giving up that prospect, whether Domi works or not. Why not take that swing, Scott?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And again, from the Hurricanes' perspective that they were protective of picks, especially after the Kotkaniemi offer sheet. And, the thing with Max Domi, it's funny, I spent some time with Max during his rookie year in Arizona. And, we had such great chemistry early on with Anthony Duclair. But he's bounced now in a very short period of time in his career. Arizona, Montreal, Columbus. Now he comes to Carolina, a team that's, listen, when you walk in the door here and you're immediately playing Rod Brindamore's way, or you're not playing. I mean, that's just how it goes. And you look at some of the moves that this Carolina team has made. Dougie Hamilton didn't fit long-term, didn't fit contract-wise. Jeff Skinner, even before Rod Brindamore coached his first game here in Carolina, wasn't a guy that fit the mold here. Can Max Domi come in and in a short period of time learn the system, play the right way here? That's the big question. If he can, I agree, Mike. I think this has the potential to be an impactful move for a team that is real close.
Really interesting stuff. Quickly, Frank Seravalli has his hand in the air, and that means he has something important to say. Frank, what do you got?
The return, it appears, on the Rickard Rakell trade from Anaheim to Pittsburgh. This is still in the queue, so it's not completed yet. But I'm told that it is a second-round pick, as well as Zach Aston Reese, who was actually in the 40s on our trade targets board today, going to the Anaheim Ducks. Aston Reese makes the money work, and a prospect is involved as well. So still some more details to flesh out, but Bob McKenzie from TSN, the one to report the return, makes sense given our intel on Zach Aston Reese. 2 goals this season, $1.725 million on the cap. So certainly someone that made sense to move as part of the transaction for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
The trifecta when it comes to deadline assets: a warm body, second-round pick, and a prospect involved in the deal. Thank you very much, Frank. Also hearing some reports from Pierre LeBrun that there was a third team involved to broker the Max Domi deal. LeBrun saying that it was the Florida Panthers involved as that third-party broker team. So there were also some reports earlier today that the Panthers could be one of those teams who are looking to take on some money. That's something Chris Gear has covered over at dailyfaceoff.com. So let's bring in Chris now to get some Gears grades on a few of these deals that we've seen go down. Gears grades brought to you by 3Ice, the new professional 3-on-3 hockey league. Head to 3ice.com, hit the tickets tab for more info. And Chris, let's start with the Domi deal. It's Max Domi, the Canes. There's going to be something else going here, but we know about the one prospect taken 94th overall, Aiden Hurstchuk. What grade are you giving the Canes here for swooping in and grabbing Max Domi at the last minute?
I like the deal for the Canes. I think one of our panelists said it best, is Domi adds a little something different than what Carolina has. He's got that snarl, that peskiness, that pain in the butt to play against. And I think with the number of playmakers that Carolina has, he's going to put up some points with them too. He's got offensive abilities. Carolina is such a high possession team. They move the puck around so well. I think he's going to get a lot of tap ins around the goal just by being that greasy guy that's willing to go to the net. So stepping in and keeping up with the arms race that was going on in the East, I think if it's a second rounder and a prospect that's the return, I think that's an A for Carolina.
And the other move, Rickard Rakell. We're hearing Aston Reese and a second rounder and a prospect going back the other way. I'll let you grade both here. What do you think of the Pittsburgh addition, and what do you think of the Anaheim return?
Yeah, this was clearly Pittsburgh's biggest need. They needed somebody to be able to play with Malkin, and they tried a whole bunch of people. It was like a turnstile on his wing, trying to find the right fit. Kapanen wasn't necessarily the guy, and a few others that they've put through there, Danton Heinen and even Aston Reese a couple games. So, I think Rakell's going to be a good fit there. He'll be pretty dynamic playing with Malkin, or even if he doesn't end up playing there, just he can obviously score goals. He's on pace for another 20-goal season this year. So I'm going to go with a B+ on that one. I think it's not a home run, but I do think Rakell is the piece that they needed most of anyone that was on the board. From an Anaheim perspective, gosh, look what they've done since they started. They moved away from Hampus Lindholm, from Josh Manson, and now Rickard Rakell. Pat Verbeek was true to his word that if he wasn't going to be able to extend anything, he was going to recoup assets, and he's done that in spades. And Anaheim's going to take a step back from where they were this year. They were a team that was on the playoff cusp all year long. So obviously, the balance of this year and even into next year, I think they take a little step back in their development. But, look out once they start converting some of this draft capital and these prospects into players, joining with the other young talent they have, and obviously Gibson sticking around, which, should give them solid goaltending into the future. I think Anaheim did really well with both this trade and the other trades they made this week. So, giving Anaheim an A for their collective body of work in this deadline, and at least a B+ in this particular Rakell trade. So good work by the Ducks.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was a pleasure having you on today. Gear's grades were fantastic, and we look forward to chatting with you throughout the rest of the week over on the Daily Faceoff Show. People can catch all your content at dailyfaceoff.com. Chris, I hope you enjoyed your first deadline day as a member of the media.
Yeah, it was outstanding. Thanks for having me, Tyler, and great job by you and the rest of the team.
There you go. That is a wrap on Gears Grades presented by 3Ice. Once again, 3ice.com, stops in 6 different USA cities, 2 stops in Canada as well. Let's bring back our big panel one last time. We've already gone late. It's 3:42, but that's the beauty of being on the internet, is that there are no rules. This one's interesting. Jarmo Kekalainen, speaking to the media, says the Domi trade call has not been completed yet. It's waiting NHL approval. He says there are 33 trades in the queue at NHL Central Registry. We may be signing off in a few minutes, but it does not look like the news is going to stop anytime soon around the league. I'll just open the floor, give you each we'll do like a mini garbage time here. Pete, 30 seconds. Your thoughts on today's deadline. What surprised you? Maybe who you liked.
I think that I like the Colorado Avalanche and how much tougher they got in terms of their depth. I think they provide some insurance defensively and just got harder to play against. I mean, the Lehkonen trade is awesome. I think that's a big ad for them. And so I think that this was a better deadline than I anticipated, I guess. Not a whole lot of massive swings, but some interesting deals. There was at least some action. We were able to stay busy for most of the day. So happy with how it went. Happy to spend the deadline day with you fellas.
Fantastic. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with Pete. I thought that Mike and I might be doing some, reminiscing about barbecues and stuff. But and again, because we're still in the flat cap era, I'm surprised by the amount of moves and teams really, I think making impactful moves, positioning themselves. I think it's hard, the Eastern Conference especially. All 8 teams have basically been decided who are going to compete in the playoffs. A lot of jockeying for position within that group. So I'm fascinated to see how it shakes out in terms of the actual matchups come the first week of May, especially in the Eastern Conference. But yeah, no, I thought it was an action-packed trade deadline period, and likewise, I wouldn't have been anywhere else. This is it's been a ton of fun.
Mike?
Well, there is one rule on the internet, and that's keep your shirt on. Other than that, I think it is pretty wide open out there. I have two things that stick out of my mind. The first is just how adept teams have become at managing the salary cap, and how important it is to have people on your staff that can get every single dollar, every penny out of the cap space that you're allotted. And some of these deals were very creative to be able to keep teams underneath that cap, not just this year, but even, going towards next season and beyond. So important to be able to have really smart mathematical people within your staff. And the other thing, just from a team perspective, I really like what the Rangers did. Adding Justin Braun on defense was good. I think they could have gone a bit further on D, but that market played itself out. It's really up front that I like. They got three players that I think are incredibly skilled at what they do. Vetrano's probably a 20-goal scorer in the NHL. He's big time underrated, one of the best shots, I think, in the league, probably because I couldn't stop him. He was like my arch nemesis. But I had Tyler Mott circled as somebody I was very curious to see where he'd go. Unbelievable penalty killer, absolute warrior on the ice. I love that player. I think he'll be great within Gerard Gallant's system. And the same thing with Andrew Kopp. Versatile, can score, can play wherever you need him to. I think the Rangers got a whole lot better in a very short time frame. And again, if Shesterkin can keep up anything close to what he has already on this season, I think the Rangers are now better positioned to at least make some noise in the playoffs.
Well, gentlemen, this was a lot of fun. It was outside of that 1 hour where things got really quiet. It was a really exciting deadline. It sounds like there's more coming down the pipe, but for the three of you, this was awesome. Really enjoyed working with you, and look forward to maybe we do something similar in the summer when it comes to free agency time. But Pete Blackburn, Scott Burnside, Mike McKenna, fantastic work. We are going to close up our show by bringing back our insider, Frank Saravalli. And Frank, the trade targets list had the top 7 names all checked off. All in all, would you say this trade deadline was busier or quieter than maybe what you expected in the week leading up?
Well, the week leading up was really busy, probably more busy than I expected. I think if there's one sort of disappointment that comes from deadline day itself is just the lack of hockey trades. I thought that was the wild card. You saw 50 names on our board. I'm not very good at math, but I believe 14 players from that top 50 moved in addition to the ton that were traded leading up to the deadline. And I think there was just a lot of talk and chatter out there to think that there would be more than just rentals that were traded. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head was Capo Kakkonen in exchange for Jacob Middleton, 2 guys that are under team control. Other than that, no whoppers, no blockbusters, nothing big, in terms of the other players that were out there, the Tyler Bertuzzis or the Travis Konecnys, the Jacob Chychrins. That whole list ended up staying put. Probably, I guess, Tyler, to be expected when it comes to deadline season. It is usually mostly just rentals. A lot of teams got better. A lot of teams preserving and acquiring some assets in exchange for players that aren't going to be helping them in a playoff chase this year. So interesting to see it all come down to the wire, as it always does. Still waiting on a few of those details. The Andrew Kopp return, I think most interestingly, I reported last night that the Winnipeg Jets had 2 second-round picks on the table for Andrew Kopp. They were trying to hold out and get a first. I don't know. We'll see what they ended up getting for Andrew Kopp in the end. Some tidy work by the New York Rangers there, also adding Tyler Mott for the 2023 4th-round pick. And so Mott and Kopp, they did some nice work. The Colorado Avalanche, we went into this. What are the Avs going to do? What are the Rangers going to do? There you go. You have your 2 answers.
Our boy producer Liam did a quick count. Last time when he counted 21 trades today, 33 players moved in those trades as well. We'll see what the final number ends up coming down as. And if Jarmo Kekalainen is correct when he says there are 33 trades still stuck in the queue. Frank,
you got to remember some of them, Tyler, end up being somewhat small. Like there was a minor league trade that went Anthony Botetto from the New York Rangers to San Jose. Like that would count as one of the 33 that's in the queue. So Lots when it gets to this point, each trade call could take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, depending on the complexities involved. If you've got a ton of trades, they end up piling up from noon on and may not get sorted out till 6:30, 7 o'clock tonight.
My last question I have for you, Frank Seravalli, and we'll be covering this more on another Daily Faceoff show tomorrow, new episode of the DFO Rundown, which will drop later this week. The top names still on the trade targets list that did not move: Tyler Bertuzzi, Sean Monahan, Jacob Chychrun, Alexander Georgiev, and Connor Garland are the 5. Which one of those names stands out the most to you and is maybe the most surprising?
I would say probably Alexander Georgiev. And I know the Rangers were trying hard over the last number of months to move him. I think there were lots of questions about not just his play, but also his body language and just the general book on Alexander Georgiev around the league. And he's a guy that's not coming back to New York. So can they use him in the Stanley Cup playoffs if they need him? Of course they can. I think they were trying to improve, not necessarily their goaltending, but their situation, in that they know they can't keep Georgiev. So now they're faced to trade him where every team knows that he's not coming back in the summer. That was probably the one guy that I thought in that group really would go. The other ones, I've been a skeptic, and you've talked and we've heard this for the last number of months. I'd been a skeptic the entire time that Jacob Chychrun was going to move. I think if someone really wanted to get him, they would have stepped up in December when his name was out there so often and the Arizona Coyotes weren't hanging up the phone. If the package didn't materialize then, I'm not entirely certain why it would now. So Chychrun ends up staying, and it creates an awkward dynamic. Chychrun was a guy that didn't really want to leave Arizona previously. It's not like he was in there raising his hand saying, "Hey, Bill Armstrong, get me out of here." Instead, no, it was, "I really like playing in Arizona." One of maybe the handful of guys that can say that and had been with that team for a long time. Now they end up keeping him after his name has clearly been dangled out there for a while. It feels a lot like the Oliver Ekman-Larsson situation from a few years back when he almost got traded to Boston or Vancouver. A whole year goes by, and then they finally end up getting him in Vancouver eventually. It feels like that type of situation may be unfolding here again in the next few months for Jacob Chychrun.
Well, Frank, this was a lot of fun here. We went a lot longer than 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours live on the air. Mike McKenna, Scott Burnside, Chris Gear, who had Gear's grades, brought to you by 3ice, 3ice.com. Hit the tickets tab for more info. Pete Blackburn joining us from Bally Sports as well. Bally Sports. Chris Peters for the next wave. Matt Larkin, who had our Manscaped trade targets list. Once again, just because the deadline is hit and it's passed doesn't mean that promo code doesn't work. It does. DFO deadline, 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Frank, this was a ton of fun, man. Fantastic work as well with all the insider info. From everyone here at Daily Faceoff, including Liam Horban and Alex Allard, I am signing off from our marathon trade deadline show. Keep it locked on Daily Faceoff in the meantime, and the Daily Faceoff show will return tomorrow at noon Eastern.
Thanks for watching the Daily Faceoff show.
Make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel to never miss an episode.